Chapter 1464. Worried that another wave of Han soldiers would come, Wu Shugu could not care about anything else. He urged his horse to charge forward until he reached the front of the cavalry. When he was only 100 steps away from the Han soldiers, he stopped his horse and said, "Stop shooting. I am the general of the golden armored cavalry, Wu Shugu. I am here to surrender." Yes. Yang Qindong didn't recognize Wu Shugu, so he turned to Gray with a questioning look on his face. "That's right, Heavenly Khan. This person is the general of the golden armored cavalry. It seems that his surrender must be true. Heaven Khan, please show mercy." Gray used the introduction as an opportunity to plead for mercy. With Gray taking the lead, Chi-1 Baru Wu Tua and the other generals also began to plead. The golden armored cavalry was the elite of the Mongol cavalry. It would be a pity if they died like this. Yang Qindong did not immediately reply. Instead, he appeared to be in deep thought. After 5 or 6 breaths, he said, "Originally, I wanted to kill them. However, since you all are pleading for mercy, I will spare their lives. However, while they can avoid death, they cannot escape punishment. From now on, there will be no more golden armored cavalry. The remaining 20,000 will be divided among the generals." It was fine to leave the golden armored cavalry, but they had to be scattered. Otherwise, no matter where they were placed, they would cause unease. The 5-star army was not made up of the black cavalry and the elites of the 1st Cavalry Army. If it was an ordinary army, they would be under a lot of pressure when facing the golden armored cavalry. For safety reasons, this army could not be left alive. When Yang Qindong finished speaking, the eyes of the other Mongol generals lit up. They did not expect that pleading for mercy for their comrades would actually bring them benefits. This was the golden armored cavalry. Even if they were given a few thousand each, it would still be a very powerful force. Thinking that this was the benefit that Yang Qindong had given them, the generals got off their horses and knelt on the ground. While expressing their gratitude, they were also expressing their loyalty. "Everyone rise. Since these people have chosen to surrender, I will leave the rest to you. Let's enter the city first." Looking at the majestic new Salai city behind him, Yang Qindong said calmly, "The new capital of the Golden Horde would also be trampled under his feet. Considering the death of the old Khan Mahama and the capture of the new Khan Bora, it also indicated the end of the Golden Horde that had lasted for more than 200 years. As the Terminator, Yang Qindong felt proud. Throughout history, it had always been the Mongols finding trouble with the Hans. If anyone could advance 1,000 li and drive them away, it would already be a great achievement. Yet today, he'd actually killed his way to their lair and uprooted them. What sort of great achievement was this? After the 2 great Khans were killed and captured by the Han army, the Golden Horde soldiers hiding within the city were already scared out of their wits. Under the threat of Gray, Chi-1 and the rest, when they saw the hundreds of cannons aimed at the city gates, the Mongol soldiers within the city finally chose to surrender. Compared to the time when Salai City was conquered, the nobles all ran away. This time, it was like catching turtles in a jar, and they were all captured. The Golden Horde had lasted for more than 200 years, and the nobles had also lasted for more than 200 years. The amount of wealth they had accumulated was so great that Yang Qindong was scared out of his wits when She returned the favor. Even though he had made some preparations, and had obtained more than 200 million taels of silver in Salai City, when he heard that he had obtained more than 300 million taels of silver from these nobles, he was still very surprised and happy. "Sixth young master, these things are not all silver. Instead, most of them are jewels. They have already been sealed and stored away. Once the silver in Salai City has been transported away, the treasures here will be transported away." When She said this, his expression was also very excited. After all, for someone who was used to being poor, suddenly having a mountain of gold in front of them, one could imagine how excited he would be. Yang Qindong's thoughts also returned to his hometown because of this sentence. How much longer will it take for Salai City to settle the issue of seizing and transporting the goods? About 1.5 more months. "Sixth young master, as you know, we have seized so much that we have mobilized all the carriages we can, but it will still take a lot of time." When he said this, She was also very emotional. He had never thought that one day, he would have a headache because of too much seizing and transporting. 1.5 more months. Then let's wait for the goods here to be transported away. Yang Chendong was a little numb, but he was even happier. After all, no one would complain about having too much money, even if he was the lord of Yangxia. Especially when he thought about how much they had seized this time. Once they reached Qiqian City, and the news spread throughout the world, presumably those who had stopped him from sending troops would all shut their mouths. Reality had already proven that the benefits of opening up a new territory far exceeded everyone's expectations. Just based on this, when Yang Chendong wanted to point his troops elsewhere in the future, no one would come out to stop him. Just as he was thinking about how ugly some people's faces would be after the news spread, an indescribable smile flashed across Yang Chendong's face. After a while, when Yang Chendong was almost done rejoicing, he noticed that Shabi was still standing in front of him. Is there something else? Sixth young master, there is something, Shabi said with a conflicted expression. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong and Shabi had known each other for many years, and he admired Shabi's abilities. Reality had also proven that Shabi was a person who could remain calm and make his own decisions when faced with big matters. However, he did not know what was so difficult for him. Commander Shay, there are no outsiders here. If you have something to say, just say it. Yang Chendong's expression returned to normal. Yes. Originally, Shabi did not know how to phrase the matter he wanted to report. However, seeing that Yang Chendong did not treat him as an outsider, he decided to speak the truth. He immediately bent his knees and knelt down. Sixth young master, please restrain the Mongolian cavalry who just surrendered. You don't know, but the city is in a mess because of them. The citizens are complaining and many of them are already thinking of moving out. What? There's such a thing? Yang Chendong suddenly stood up from his chair. His expression was extremely ugly at this moment, and there was even a faint killing intent that flowed out. Yes, sixth young master, you only need to send people to check the streets to see if what I said is true or false. Although those surrendered generals have some merits, they should not treat the citizens like this. If this continues, I'm afraid there will be a big problem. Since he had already started, he didn't hesitate to say what he wanted to say next. He said whatever came to his mind. Even if he offended those surrendered generals, he was willing to accept it. When he heard that there would be a big problem, Yang Chendong knew that things must have reached a point where they could not be controlled. Otherwise, Shabi, who was always calm when faced with problems, would not say such words. How long has it been? He was naturally asking how long the chaos had been in the city. Shabi's heart shook. He knew that Yang Chendong had found the crux of the matter. He lowered his head and said, replying to the sixth young master, it has been 4 days. 4 days? We've only been in New Sarai City for 4 days. Does that mean they've been here since they entered the city? Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with a murderous aura. It was no wonder that he was so angry. Before entering the city, he had told his generals that they were not to disturb the citizens after entering the city. In the future, the citizens here would be Yangxia's citizens, and they must be treated well. He remembered that the generals agreed very happily at that time. But looking at Shabi's words, it seemed that no one took his words seriously. Seeing Yang Chendong's killing intent, Shabi replied with some trepidation. Yes, after they entered the city, the surrendered soldiers began to loot. At first, it was targeted at the rich and powerful, but later on, even the commoners became the targets of the loot. Listening to Shabi's report, Yang Chendong's face was as calm as water. Since it has been 4 days, why did you only report it now? This. Shabi did not know how to answer. Fortunately, Yang Chendong then said the answer. You don't think that they are the surrendered generals. Without them, we would not have won this battle so easily, so they are the meritorious officials. It is not good to report the meritorious officials. It will make people misunderstand that you are jealous, right? Yes. It is just that this general is not jealous. It is just that they have all performed meritorious deeds. If we attack them now, I fear that there will be people who will think otherwise. If that happens, it will not be good for your reputation, sixth young master. Shabi explained. My reputation will not be good? What is reputation? Shabi, It seems that you still have a lot to learn. You don't know that reputation is just a way for some people to express their opinions. However, true reputation is that the commoners can eat well, wear warm clothes, and live in peace and contentment. Only then can you be considered a qualified monarch. If you can't do this, even if everyone praises you, is it really good? Hearing Yang Chendong's sincere and heartfelt words, Shabi nodded repeatedly and said, "Yes, this general understands." What should be said had been said. Now it was up to Shabi to comprehend it himself. However, the matter of the surrendered soldiers looting had to be resolved. Shabi, immediately send the order. Have the surrendered soldiers come to this prince for a meeting. Was this raising the butcher's knife? Shabi thought in his heart. He nodded repeatedly and said, "Yes, this general will go and pass the order." It had been 4 days since Yang Chendong led the army into New Salai city. In these few days, Yang Chendong stayed in Mahama's golden tent and did not go out. There were simply too many good things here. Some of them could be said to be priceless existences. Even Yang Chendong was not an exception. He did his best to play with each item for a while. Chapter 1465. Because of this, they did not know what was happening outside. Moreover, because these surrendered generals did things methodically, the place where they looted was far away from the golden tent. Therefore, even the black cavalry did not notice. If it was not for Yubi's report, it would probably take a day or two or something big to report. As soon as Yubi left, Yang Chendong immediately asked Beta Persei to call the manager of the city's intelligence department to find out what had happened in the city in the past 4 days. Soon, Beta Persei returned and found out more details from him. His story was even more interesting than Yubi's. According to the data reported by the intelligence department, the number of civilians killed and injured because of the looting reached more than 200. As for the injured, there were countless more. Good, a dog can't change its habit of eating shit. Yang Chendong said angrily. At this moment, he really wanted to kill all the surrendered soldiers who looted. However, he also knew that this was not the action of a wise man. Doing this would only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. What he wanted was for all the surrendered generals to reflect on this matter from the bottom of their hearts, and not rely on government orders to restrain them. After more than 2 hours, the surrendered generals in the city rushed to the golden tent. Some of them were more than 10 miles away, and rushed over as soon as they heard the news. When they arrived, they had a confused look on their faces. Obviously, they did not understand why the heavenly Khan suddenly summoned them. As the leader of the generals, Gray's mind was also a mess. However, he was not as flustered as everyone else. On the contrary, he sat quietly in the hall and drank tea like the Han people. He was very clear that if he wanted to integrate into the Han army, he had to do his best to maintain the same habits as them. This was the best way to get closer to them. In contrast, the other generals did not have the time to be so calm. They sat on their chairs and made a lot of noise, just like when the Golden Horde held a meeting. There was no change at all. Among them, Bodo's voice was the loudest. This former scout general of the Golden Horde eventually surrendered to the Han army and retained his position as a general. Perhaps it was because he was a scout general, but he understood the situation in New Sarai better than anyone else, so he knew better than anyone else who had the most silver. So in this battle, he was the one who profited the most. Of course, Bodo wasn't an insensible person. After looting a lot of gold and silver, he took out a portion of it to show his filial piety to other people and comrades. For example, General Gray, Baruch, and Wutu all received a share. He even gave money to Shibi, Ahuli, Wushugu, and the others. Unfortunately, these people did not accept it and returned it. However, Bodo didn't mind. It was only because they were all Mongolians that he decided to share the good fortune with them. Especially Shirbei. He heard that Shirbei was a commander in the Han army. Although he did not know what this meant, it should be a high position. However, no matter how high his position was, he couldn't control himself. His immediate superior was Gray. As long as he served Gray well, there wouldn't be any problems. At this moment, Bodo was talking about robbing a rich family. He was talking about how he rushed into the house of a noble from the Golden Horde and dug out his hidden treasures. When the noble knelt down and begged for mercy, Baruch and Wutu, who were listening at the side, laughed along. Obviously, such a noble was an unreachable existence in the past. Even if they met him, he wouldn't even look at them in the eye. But now he actually had to kneel down and beg for mercy. That feeling couldn't be any better. At this moment, Yang Chendong walked into the hall under the protection of Beta Persei and a group of black cavalry soldiers. Instantly, the hall became extremely quiet. Even Bodo kept his mouth shut. In fact, the scene of Yang Chendong ordering the golden-armored cavalry to be cleaned up brought too much shock to everyone. This person was someone who wouldn't hesitate to kill if he couldn't be used. He didn't have the humble, courteous, and forgiving personality of the Han people. Evil people would naturally be dealt with by evil people. It was precisely because of Yang Chendong's performance that the Mongolian generals were afraid of him from the bottom of their hearts. Yang Chendong strode into the hall and arrived at the head of the table. Then he suddenly turned around and fiercely swept his gaze across everyone present. Following Yang Chendong's gaze, everyone who met his gaze quickly lowered their heads. Obviously, everyone was afraid of his gaze. Seeing that everyone had lowered their heads, even Bodo, who was very active just now, Yang Chendong coldly snorted and said, "Men, take Bodo out and chop him up." Yes. The black cavalry soldiers who had been waiting for a long time stepped forward with their swords and went straight for Bodo, who was still sitting on the chair and hadn't recovered from his shock. "What are you doing?" Just as the black cavalry was 2 steps away, Bodo finally reacted. He pulled out his sword and placed it in front of his chest, then shouted, "Why do you want to kill me? Why? You still dare to resist?" Seeing Bodo's seemingly instinctive reaction, Beta Persei was amused. While laughing, he moved one of his wrists. However, before he could step forward, Ba Daojiang had already rushed out and said, "How can we use second brother's great self to deal with a clown like this? I'll take care of him." Seeing Ba Daojiang rush out first, Beta Persei's face was filled with anger. However, he quickly calmed down. They were all brothers, so it didn't matter who did the teaching. Moreover, just as Ba Daojiang said, a small scout general wasn't worthy of him taking the initiative. Ba Daojiang rushed out. This former member of the Jianghu wasn't weak to begin with, and after years of experience, he was even more agile and powerful. He leaped forward and arrived in front of Bodo in 2 quick steps. Then, without waiting for Bodo to swing his sword, he kicked out, and a curved sword fell from the air. After kicking the curved sword out of Bodo's hand, Ba Daojiang followed up with a roundhouse kick to Bodo's chest. Under the powerful force, a cracking sound was heard, and Bodo's chest caved in. Your legs are getting stronger again." Yang Chendong looked at the scene with admiration and nodded his head in satisfaction. Bodo, whose chest caved in from the kick, fell to the ground with a plop. At that moment, blood was flowing out from the corner of his mouth, and he looked like he was about to die. Even so, his gaze was still fixed on Gray. Although his mouth was open, no sound came out. However, if one looked closely, they could see that he was saying the words, "Save me. Tie him up and take him out for beheading. Don't dirty this place." Ba Daojiang had already stabilized himself as he spoke in a casual tone. Then, he swept his cold gaze towards the other Mongolian generals in the hall. Revealing a harmless smile, he walked back to Beta Persei's side. "Not bad." Seeing Ba Daojiang's return, Beta Persei gave him a thumbs up with a look of praise. Compared to the interaction between the two of them, the other Mongolian generals were all dumbfounded. They didn't understand why Ba Daojiang had come forward to kill someone. This was something they had never experienced before. Even when Mahama was the Khan, he hadn't been so tyrannical. It was said that accompanying a ruler was like accompanying a tiger. At this moment, everyone finally understood. And it was precisely for some unknown reason that everyone couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Furthermore, everyone was deep in thought. Had they done something that they shouldn't have done recently? Would the next person to be pulled out to be beheaded would be themselves? The hall was even quieter than before. This sudden scene caused the Mongol generals to fall into deep thought. At this moment, Yang Chendong spoke again. "Gray Baruch, you two, do you know your crimes?" The 3 people who were called out were sweating even more now. They hurriedly left their chairs and knelt on the ground with a plop. Their heads were so close to the ground that they had zero contact with it. It was no wonder that the three of them were so nervous. After all, Bodo had just been killed. They were really worried that they would have the same ending. As for what they had done wrong, they really didn't know. However, at this moment, the three of them were smart enough not to say anything. Instead, they knelt on the ground and kowtowed continuously while saying, "We are guilty, guilty. Yes, you are indeed guilty. This Khan has repeatedly ordered that you are not allowed to disturb the people in the city. But what did you do? You clearly knew about Bodo's evil deeds. But not only did you not stop him, you even dared to accept his benefits. I think you are all accomplices." Yang Chendong's strict voice rang out. Hearing that it was actually this matter, the Mongolian generals present had an enlightened look on their faces. At this moment, they finally understood why Bodo had been beheaded. For a moment, many of them rejoiced that they hadn't been possessed to do such a thing. They couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. However, the three people kneeling on the ground all had nervous expressions on their faces. Although they hadn't sent their troops to rob Bodo, they had indeed received a gift from the robber, Bodo. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were accomplices. When they thought about Bodo's fate, they were afraid that Yang Chendong would kill them as well. Gray abruptly raised his head and said with a nervous expression, "Heavenly Khan, we were wrong, we were wrong. Please give us another chance on account of our loyalty to you and our contributions to the army." When Gray mentioned contributions, Yang Chendong couldn't help but frown. Just based on this sentence, he had already sentenced Gray to death in his heart. However, just as Gray had said, he had indeed contributed to the army. If Gray was really killed on the spot, it was inevitable that the other Mongolian generals would have other thoughts. This was especially so when the people present included He, a general who had defected to the 5-star army under his influence. Thus, Gray's punishment had to be extremely careful. Chapter 1466. Yang Chendong took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. When he looked at Gray, his expression became much calmer. "That's right. The three of you have performed meritorious deeds. Since that's the case, this Khan will give you a chance. Next, we will move against the Ross Empire. The three of you will lead the death squad as the vanguard. If you perform meritorious deeds, you will naturally be reinstated. As for Gray's current position, Ahuli will temporarily take over. What do you think?" Yang Chendong's tone changed. In Gray's ears it was like spring. Knowing that he wouldn't have to die, how could he disagree? He immediately knelt and cupped his fists. "I am willing to be the generals of the death squad. I am willing to serve the Khan." "Good." Yang Chendong revealed a satisfied expression at Gray. Then he looked at everyone and said in a clear voice, "Everyone, you are no longer generals of the Golden Horde. Instead, you are generals of the 5-star army. Since that's the case, you will have to abide by the military rules here. This Khan will say this once more. As soldiers of the 5-star army, you are not allowed to bully the citizens or disrupt the military rules. If there is a next time, no matter who it is, no matter what contributions they have made, they will be severely punished. Ahuli will keep a close eye on this matter. If anyone disobeys, you can kill them first and report later." Ahuli was the former Khan of Zhongxing. Under his rule, the citizens of the city lived a good life. He could be said to be a different kind of person in the Mongolian army. He was an ambitious general who wholeheartedly wanted to change the lives of the citizens. He was the most suitable candidate to replace Gray as the leader of the Mongolian army, and to deal with the security issues in the city. Although he was only a temporary representative, what if Gray never came back? Ahuli didn't know what Yang Chendong was thinking, but he could feel that the other party valued him. He immediately knelt on the ground and said sincerely, "Thank you, Great Khan, for thinking so highly of me. Ahuli will do my best to not let you down." From the beginning to the end of the meeting, only 15 minutes had passed. After killing Bodo, reprimanding Gray, and promoting Ahuli, Yang Chendong left. It was precisely because of this that the shorter the time they came into contact with Yang Chendong, the more mysterious he was, causing others to not dare look down upon Yang Chendong in the slightest. However, in this short 15 minutes, the pressure on the Mongol army was immense. After seeing how Yang Qindong dealt with Bodo, everyone knew that the Heavenly Khan was an iron-blooded person. He wouldn't let sand get in his eyes. Such a person wasn't easy to fool, and no one dared to fool him. As for giving a chance to Gray, Barlu, and Wu Tua, this proved that the Heavenly Khan was someone who cherished old friendships. Not only did he not incur the disgust of everyone by dealing with the three of them, he even stripped them of their military authority. On the contrary, everyone felt that following him was the right thing to do. At the very least, they wouldn't erase their previous military exploits because of a small matter. They should make more military exploits so that they would be safe. Just borrowing a person's head had produced such an effect. After hearing this, Shirbei couldn't help but sigh. The sixth young master was indeed the sixth young master. His methods of solving problems weren't something he could compare to. After this incident, the public security in New Sarai immediately improved. Ordinary people were no longer bullied, and under Ahuli's leadership, the stolen property was returned untouched. Yang Qindong's reputation also resounded throughout this land. Using this opportunity, Yang Qindong called Ahuli over and gave him the order to deal with the Churkas and Alans. Remember, any forces that oppose us must be completely eradicated. There can only be one voice here, and that is to die if you don't surrender. This time, I'll give you 200,000 Mongol soldiers and enough provisions. At the same time, I'll equip you with a firearm regiment and 50 field cannons. Do you have any other questions? After calling Ahuli over, Yang Qindong instructed him. Being able to lead an army alone was somewhat beyond Ahuli's expectations. He was just a surrendered general. Although he had been a Khan before, he only led 30,000 soldiers. But now, he could lead 200,000 soldiers with the support of guns and cannons. This was something he had never dreamed of. This general will do his best to complete this mission and live up to the Heavenly Khan's expectations. At this moment, Ahuli couldn't wait to dig out his heart and give it to Yang Qindong to repay his kindness. Feeling Ahuli's excitement, Yang Qindong got up and walked in front of him. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Very good, this Khan is looking forward to your performance. By the way, I'll also give you the 20,000 golden armored cavalry. Make good use of them. This is a force that can't be ignored." Yang Qindong didn't think highly of the golden armored cavalry, especially after knowing that after many years of development, their strength was no longer as strong as before, so he didn't think highly of them. But if he left them to Ahuli to deal with the other Mongol tribes, they would still be a force to be reckoned with. Just the golden armored cavalry alone wouldn't be able to harm them with ordinary swords. Yes, yes. Ahuli kept nodding his head and making a promise. After arranging Ahuli's affairs, Yang Qindong began to prepare for the invasion of Russia. As the leader of Yangxie and the founder of the five-star army, it was destined that he couldn't stay in one place for too long. It had been 3 years since he entered the Far East. According to his plan, he had to deal with the situation here this year. Fortunately, the Golden Horde had been destroyed, so he had already completed half of his mission. The next step was to deal with the White Russians. Facing an enemy that relied more on outdated firearms, Yang Qindong was full of confidence. 7 days later, Ahuli, who had made sufficient preparations, led 200,000 Mongol surrendered soldiers out of New Salai and went straight to the Cherkass camp. Half a month later, a large number of horses flooded into the city. They were all responsible for transporting gold and silver. Following the arrival of this army, Yang Qindong also led the 200,000 Mongol soldiers, the new Second Army, and the remaining 3 firearm regiments and an artillery regiment of the 2nd Cold Front Division out of the city. They headed straight for the Rossi Duchy's territory. Rossi Duchy's capital, Moscow. It was currently shrouded in dark clouds. In the main hall of the duchy, the blind Grand Justice looked at the scout general with a gloomy expression as he reported the battle report. Since last winter, the Rossi Duchy had been preparing to send troops north. They wanted to chase out the Han army that occupied the northernmost city, Oksino. For this, they had made a lot of preparations, such as military supplies, provisions, firearms, cannons, and even war horses. They were just waiting for the coming year to show their might. But before they could send troops north, they had received news that the Han army was going to attack the Golden Horde. They had also heard that the Han army was coming aggressively, with more than 100,000 soldiers. When they first heard the news, the important officials and nobles of the Rossi Duchy did not take it seriously. Everyone only cared about what benefits they could gain from this battle. After a heated discussion in the court, the final conclusion was to stop sending troops north and focus on the east. They would wait for the Han army to be defeated by the Golden Horde. Then they would take the opportunity to strike and reap the benefits. When the time was right, they would send troops north. It would be easy for them to take back Oxino. However, the outcome of the battle was far beyond everyone's expectations. The Han army quickly breached Sarai, the capital of the Golden Horde, forcing Muhammad Khan to retreat to the city of Shinsa to avoid the brunt of the attack. Not only that, the tough Muhammad even sent an envoy to ask for help from the Rossi Duchy. The two sides had been fighting for many years, and it was more appropriate to call them old enemies. During this time, they had won and lost some, but no one had expected that the two would one day join forces, and that the Golden Horde would take the initiative to ask for help. As for the envoy sent by the Golden Horde, the blind duke arranged for someone to send him to the post house, and then he came to discuss this matter with the other officials. Regarding this matter, the officials had two opinions. One was to send troops, and the other was to not send troops. The reason for not sending troops was to use the Han army to deal a heavy blow to the Golden Horde, which would be more beneficial to the Rossi Duchy's independence and unification. The reason for sending troops was to prevent the Han army from becoming too powerful. After all, Muhammad was a very proud person. Even he had to lower himself to ask for help. This showed that the Han army's fighting strength was very strong. If he didn't help, once the Han army really subdued the Golden Horde, he wouldn't have anything to worry about when fighting with the Han army in the future. Yes, even at this time, the Rossi people still believed that although the Han army was strong, they could only defeat the Golden Horde and not defeat it. The Golden Horde could summon hundreds of thousands of cavalry at any time with a decree, and the Rossi people had already experienced the strength of the Golden Horde. No one could defeat the Golden Horde, at least not in the short term. This had become the consensus of the Rossi people. The meeting lasted for a long time, and in the end, the people who wanted to send reinforcements had the upper hand. The blind duke finally decided to send reinforcements, but it would take time to send the troops from the north to the east. They did not have the convenience of carrying food with them like the 5-star army, so they needed a lot of time to prepare. Finally, 10 days later, the 100,000 reinforcements prepared by the Rossi started their journey. This was thanks to the previous preparations, otherwise, they would not have been able to set off so quickly. But at this time, new news came. The Han army was already outside New Sarai, engaged in a major battle with the Golden Horde, and finally won. They killed Muhammad Khan with cannon fire and captured Bora Khan. Hundreds of thousands of Mongolian cavalry were defeated, and the Golden Horde was about to become history. The Rossi people's enemy also changed from the Golden Horde to the Han army. When the news came, the entire Rossi people were shocked. Many people did not believe the truth of this matter. Although more than one group of scouts reported the same news, there were still many people who did not believe it. How could the powerful Golden Horde be destroyed so easily? Even if it was destroyed, it should be done by the powerful Rossi people. Chapter 1467. Regardless of whether they believed it or not, the truth was the truth. In the next few days to half a month, the Rossi Duchy was still trying to find out how the Golden Horde was destroyed by the Han army in such a short period of time. News came again that the Han army had turned around and was heading towards the Rossi Duchy. How did the Han army manage to reorganize so quickly and digest the hundreds of thousands of Mongol cavalrymen? Very quickly, no one bothered about this question, because the next target of the Han army was themselves. Even the powerful Golden Horde had been wiped out in less than a month. The question was, how long could the Rossi kingdom last as their opponent? All of the officials and nobles started to panic. For the first time, they realized that they had lost their confidence and did not know how to face the Han army. At this time, another piece of bad news came. The Han army in the northern cities had moved. They had suddenly set off from Oxino City and moved from the north to the south. They had conquered Ust Zili Lima City and were heading towards Arkhangelsk city. This was obviously to coordinate with the Han army to deal with the Rus country. After the news came, the Rus country, which was already frightened, fell into chaos once again. Some of the capitulators were also born. This seemed to be a law of historical development. No matter how strong a country was, there would always be some people who were afraid of death. When danger came, their first thought was not how to face it, but how to protect their own interests. The so-called negotiation party, which was also the capitulators, jumped out at this time. In the court, the capitulators, led by Nevsky, quickly made their voices known. They wanted to immediately send people to negotiate with the Han army before the other side had taken down more cities. They wanted to negotiate with the Han army before they had the strength to negotiate. For this, they were willing to pay a price and even give up some cities. In the eyes of the capitulators, the Han army did not have the strength to destroy them. Although they had defeated the Golden Horde, they had definitely lost a lot of their strength. Furthermore, they had captured hundreds of thousands of Mongol cavalrymen. These people were all arrogant and unruly, so how could they be so easily subdued? It would probably take some time to deal with them. This was an opportunity for the Russian Empire. While the Russian Empire was not completely stable internally, they would take the initiative to show weakness and dispel the Russian Empire's killing intent. This would create enough time and opportunity for the Russian Empire's development. Nevsky even suggested that they should submit to the Han Chinese if necessary. Anyway, it's not like they haven't done such things before. Didn't they submit to the Golden Horde before? Once this idea was made, it quickly gained the upper hand. Many important officials, generals, and nobles of the court expressed their support. He also urged the blind duke to quickly settle the matter and have a good talk with the Han army. They did not want to wait for the enemy soldiers to arrive at the city gates. At that time, everything would be too late. The blind duke looked down on these spineless people. However, he knew that the other party was right. Now that the morale of the Han army was high, it would not be wise to make an enemy out of them. If they could drag things out and wait for the other party to not have so much killing intent, wait for the hundreds of thousands of Mongolian cavalry captives to start causing trouble, and wait for the internal situation to become unstable. Only then could they counterattack, and their chances of winning would be much higher. The blind duke, who had his own plans, finally agreed to the idea of surrendering. He sent out a negotiation team led by Nevsky to welcome the Han army that was heading towards Moscow. He hoped to settle the matter as soon as possible. After receiving the order, Nevsky prepared for a night and set off early the next morning. It could be seen that he had done a lot of work in private. After he left, under the leadership of young Master Ivan outside of Moscow, the excavation of the tunnel began. The tunnels were the best way to restrain the charge of the cavalrymen. Then they would use their muskets to counterattack. This was the tactic they used to deal with the Golden Horde cavalrymen. They sent people to negotiate while preparing for war. This action showed the stubborn and cunning side of the Russian Empire. Especially Ivan, who said to the outside world that the strong would not place their hopes on the enemy, and that their own strength was the most important thing. Not to mention the various preparations outside of Moscow, just the fact that Nevsky and his men rushed over. They finally met the Han vanguard army in Kazan City. When they reported their identities and took out the relevant documents, the vanguard general, the current commander of the Russian division, Nikolaev, welcomed them. They were all Caucasians, and they were connected by blood. This made Nevikov very happy. As soon as he saw Nicholas, he tried to get close to him, as if they were talking about their common ancestor. He wanted Nicholas to speak for him in the future. Naturally, Nikolaev gave him the cold shoulder. It was true that he was from the Russian Empire, but he was not from the Russian Empire. He had never enjoyed any benefits from the establishment of the Russian Empire. Where did the Rossi people go when he had no food to eat? When he was bullied by the Mongol cavalry, where did the Russians go? When people in his tribe froze to death because of the cold, where did the Russians go? If it weren't for the appearance of Yang Qindong, their tribe would still be hiding like rats in the dark. They would still not have enough to eat and sleep, and even their safety would not be guaranteed. During the most dangerous time, it was Yang Qindong who saved his tribe. Now that he had entrusted him with such an important task, How could Nikolaev not know which side he should stand on? Nikolai didn't even spare a glance at Novikov's flattery and the gifts that Novikov gave him. He would not forget that there was a day in the military regulations of the 5-star army that no one was allowed to privately give gifts. Regardless of whether they were given by subordinates or enemies, they would be severely punished. If it was light, they would lose their position. If it was heavy, they would lose their lives. The might of the 5-star army's military regulations could be seen from how General Bodo was beheaded on the spot. Furthermore, Yang Chendong was using the carrot and the stick. After killing Bodo and punishing Gray, Baruch, and Yudo, he took out a sum of silver to reward the other generals who did not commit any crimes. By doing so, not only did he reward the people who did not commit any crimes, he also divided the Mongol surrendered soldiers, who were not as united as a single piece of metal. It could be imagined that the Mongol generals who received the rewards would definitely side with Yang Chendong. If that happened, they would be the first to oppose anyone who dared to play any tricks. This was his master, Yang Chendong. He possessed such unyielding methods, as well as those omnipotent firearms and cannons. It could be said that his methods were unfathomable. More importantly, he was indebted to him for recognizing his worth. If not for his timely appearance, how would his clansmen be able to live peacefully in the large houses in the city? How would they be able to eat their fill and wear warm clothes without worrying about food and clothing? How would their children be able to go to school and learn how to read? Just based on this, Nikolaev had long since become Yang Chendong's most loyal subordinate. He would definitely not allow himself or anyone else to harm Yang Chendong's interests. With such a firm will, Nikolaev's actions were destined to not receive any response. Seeing how difficult it was to talk to Nikolaev, he could only helplessly request for him to report to the Han Army's commander. He wanted to meet Yang Chendong personally and report to him. Naturally, Nikolaev did not dare to neglect such a matter. Although he did not have a good impression of these self-proclaimed White Russians, he did not understand Yang Chendong's intentions. Naturally, he did not dare to make a decision on his own. Very quickly, Nikolaev reported the matter of Nikolaev representing the Rus Duchy to Yang Chendong, who was rushing over. He also quickly received the order to stay put. When the news was passed to Nikolaev, he was naturally very happy. He knew that the Han Army's commander had the intention to negotiate. At that moment, he began to carefully consider what to say when he met the person in question. Was Yang Chendong preparing to negotiate with the Rus Duchy? The answer was that it was impossible. Others might not know, but Yang Chendong was very clear. Whether it was the current blind duke or his successor, Ivan, they were all very famous figures in White Russia's history. They were all elites among elites. He would never underestimate such an enemy, nor would he give such a person a chance to catch his breath and make a comeback. The reason why he wanted to negotiate was because he wanted to use the White Russians to surrender. He wanted to see how he could obtain the greatest benefits with the smallest price. 3 days later, the Central Army resisted Kazan City. Nikolaev and Nikolaev came out of the city together to welcome Yang Chendong's arrival. From afar, when he saw that Yang Chendong was only a man in his 30s, Nikolaev was shocked. After coming here, Nikolaev had done a lot of work. He spent a lot of money to get to know some of the officers in the foreign division. From them, he learned some things about Yang Chendong. He learned that this Han Bugnam of Gojoseon had started more than a decade ago. Then he expanded his territory and even conquered a huge territory that was not inferior to the Golden Horde's ancestors. It was precisely because of this that Nyeko thought that this Wunan prince of the Great Ming Dynasty was in his 50s, or at least close to his 50s. Otherwise, if he started more than a decade ago, how could he gain the trust of others and have such a strong appeal? However, the moment he saw Yang Chendong with his own eyes, he knew that he was wrong. This Prince Wu Nan of the Great Ming Dynasty was too young. If this was the case, didn't this person already have his own army when he was in his teens? Even the most outstanding youth in the Rus Duchy, Ivan, could not compare to this kind of talent. Chapter 1468. Yang Chendong's age shocked Nekov, and gave him a feeling that the following negotiations would not go smoothly. The younger they were, the more impulsive they were, and the more arrogant they would be. Naturally, they would not be easy to deal with. Young Chandong entered the city. In the house arranged by Nikolai, he met with Nekov. Nekov was more than 50 years old, and he was also a noble in the White Russia. He was also the representative of the capitulation faction in the country. Both sides met in the main hall. Yang Chandong was accompanied by Beta Persei and Shibi. It could be seen that Yang Chandong intended to promote this person and teach him more. This was also a sign that he wanted to be put in an important position. Naturally, Shibi would try his best to grasp this opportunity. After Nekov entered the main hall, he began to lead the negotiations without waiting for Yang Chandong to speak. Are you here to represent the Ross Duchy to surrender? As soon as they met, Shibi took the initiative to speak. He purposely turned the negotiations into surrender to see what kind of reaction the other party would have. Nekov's face turned red as he felt the other party looking down on him. If someone from the Ross Duchy spoke to him like this, he would immediately call for the guards. He would make the person who dared to provoke him pay a heavy price, even their life. However, this was a city controlled by the Han army. He was here to negotiate, so he could only suppress the anger in his heart. He said with an ugly expression, "General, you have misunderstood. I am not here to surrender. I am here to represent the Ross Duchy to negotiate. You Han people have a saying, it is easier to make friends than enemies, so wait, negotiate." Shibi shook his head as he spoke. To be honest, there is no past friendship between us, so I don't think there is a need to negotiate. Of course, if you're here to surrender, we won't kill you. But if you're not, then there's no need to talk. Please leave. He did not even listen to the conditions and directly rejected him. Nikov's expression was extremely ugly. He really wanted to fling his sleeves and leave, but he also knew that if he wanted to do big things, he couldn't act on loyalty. He could only take 2 deep breaths, suppress the unhappiness in his heart, and say, "General, I don't know what you mean by surrender. Can you make it clear?" As expected, Nikov didn't leave. He recalled what Yang Chandong had told him before. Later on, he just had to say whatever was unpleasant to hear. The other party definitely wouldn't be provoked. At that time, he still couldn't believe it, but reality slapped him in the face. He truly admired Yang Chandong. This was a case of weak countries having no diplomacy. The so-called righteousness was sometimes very important, but when the strength of both sides was not on the same level, what was righteousness? Don't you hear that the winner is king and the loser is nothing? Nikov's power was weak, and Xiaobi naturally became stronger. And surrender? Naturally, you will have to open the city gates, surrender, and surrender. Hand over all your belongings and territories to us. Of course, even if you surrender, we won't kill all of you. We will definitely leave some things for you to eat. Xiaobi simply stated his intentions, and then shut his mouth. He really wanted to see how Nikov would react. While he was still waiting for Xiaobi to continue, Nikov suddenly believed his words. At that moment, he realized that Xiaobi had finished speaking. He couldn't help but widen his eyes and ask, "That's it? And it's over?" Xiaobi said with an expression as if it was natural. After hearing Xiaobi's affirmative answer, Nikov's face turned red with anger. "May I ask, what's the difference between this surrender and a battle to the death?" "Of course there's a difference. If you lose a battle to the death, you will be beheaded. If you surrender, at least you can live, right?" Xiaobi said with an expression as if he didn't want to die. Looking at Xiaobi's serious expression, Nikov finally understood that Xiaobi didn't have any intention of negotiating. In other words, Xiaobi was just going with the flow. Since that was the case, there was no need for him to stay. He cupped his hands and imitated the Han's gesture. After bidding farewell, he turned around and prepared to leave. At that moment, Yang Chandong, who had been watching the show, opened his mouth. "Nikov, right?" As soon as he spoke in fluent Russian, Nekov, who was about to leave, stopped in his tracks. His heart was filled with joy. It seems that the other party was just testing me. Now that he saw that I was about to leave, he became anxious. There was still room for negotiation. Although he was delighted, he pretended to be angry. He turned around and cupped his hands towards Yang Chandong. "Yes, Your Highness Bugnam of Gojoseon. To be honest, your subordinate is too reckless. Enough." Without waiting for Nikev to continue, Yang Chendong interrupted him. Then he used an unquestionable Chinese and said, "Remember, Commander Xiaobi's words represent my meaning. There are only two paths for your Rossi country to take. Either you are destroyed by us, or you surrender. As for the so-called peace talks, that is simply impossible. The only difference is that the first path is death, while the second path is survival." When Yang Chendong said this with an unquestionable tone, he saw Nikev's shocked expression. Nikev must be thinking, "If that's the case, why did you stop me? Do you want to repeat what you just said?" Seeing the doubt in Nevikov's heart, Yang Chendong continued without waiting for him to ask. "Since you have the guts to come and talk to this king about peace, this king will give you a chance. If there comes a day when your Ross Empire is unable to withstand this king's army, you will still have a chance to negotiate. Furthermore, at that time, I can leave you with 10% of your wealth and allow you to move out. At that time, you can choose any place in this king's territory to continue living. This way, your family clan will be able to survive. But remember, there are conditions. I want the lives of the blind Duke and Ivan. If you can't see them, even if you surrender, you can only guarantee that you won't die. You won't have any wealth, and your family won't be able to survive." After saying all this in one breath, Yang Chendong waved his hand and said, "Okay, you can leave now." Nikev walked out of the main hall in a daze. When he returned to his temporary residence, his emotions slowly stabilized. Then a smile appeared on his face. No matter what, this diplomatic mission was fruitful. At least he had an extra choice compared to others. As for whether he needed to do so, it would depend on the development of the situation. If the Russian army won, then it would be better if this matter never happened. On the other hand, if the Han army won, then he could make a choice. At least he could ensure the safety of his family. Wasn't this what he was after? In the main hall, after Nikev left, she looked at Yang Chendong with a doubtful gaze. You don't understand? Or do you think that what I said just now was meaningless?" Shibi nodded without concealing his inner thoughts. Sigh, the human heart. Yang Chendong sighed heavily. Just now, I only planted a seed of hope in Nikev's heart. It might not seem useful now, but when it came to a critical moment, the effect it would have would be astonishing. Why don't you wait and see, haha. Yang Chendong laughed confidently. After being a leader for so many years, his growth was very fast. For example, his control of the overall situation, his understanding of Yangtze's progress, and his ability to control people's hearts. The human heart was sometimes very complicated, but sometimes it was very simple. It all depended on how you guided it. Once you successfully guided people's hearts, it was equivalent to controlling the overall situation. It was equivalent to stepping into the threshold of victory. With regards to Yang Chendong's words, she was very convinced. When he heard this, he decided to wait and see. He wanted to see if Nikev, who left after being humiliated, would really deliver the heads of those two important people to him when the situation turned bad, as the sixth young master said. Moscow City. Nikev had returned. When Ivan received the news, he was digging trenches outside the city gates. His intention was very simple. He wanted to use these things to delay the Han cavalry's attack. This way, as long as they could drag it out until winter, the cold weather would become a helper and cause the Han army to retreat. This way, they would have more time to catch their breath. In the long run, they would be able to wear down the enemy's morale and obtain the final victory. Father-in-law wants to have a meeting and wants me to go. Ivan jumped out of a trench and looked at the soldier who came to pass on the message. Yes, Lord Nikev has returned. He said that he brought the latest news. The soldier said with a serious face. Good, lead the way. Ivan clapped his hands, and after removing the black mud on them, he strode forward. As he walked, he thought this time, no matter what conditions Nikev used to force the Han army to retreat, he would not admit it. He would not accept any form of compensation for the ceasefire. He wanted to use his own strength to force the Han army to retreat. This was what a true man should do. Ivan, who already had his own ideas, was led to the main hall by the soldier. Here, the civil and military officials were already lined up on both sides. When Ivan entered, he noticed that everyone's expression was not too good. He guessed that the Han army's conditions were very harsh. This is also good. We can only fight to the death. Chapter 1469. Ivan, who had a heroic plot and also wanted to be a hero, thought so as he walked to his seat and stood still. About a quarter of an hour later, a few more ministers walked into the hall, followed by the Grand Duke of Blindness. Since everyone is here, let's hear what Nikowski has to say. Cough. Nikowski coughed, attracting everyone's attention. His expression was somewhat ugly as he said what he was willing to say. As for what Yang Chendong said, he naturally hid it in his heart. That was one of his life-saving treasures, so he would not easily show it to others. After Nekov finished his words, everyone in the hall became silent. No one thought that this would be the result. If they didn't surrender, they would die. Even peace talks were rejected. Did this mean that the Han army was too arrogant? Or did they have enough confidence to defeat the Ross Empire? Ha 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 ha. In the silence, a burst of laughter came from Ivan's mouth, attracting everyone's attention. Ivan, who had been laughing for a few times, finally stopped when he saw that everyone's attention was focused on him. He said, "All right, can everyone give up now? Who still wants to talk about peace with the Han army?" At the end, Ivan's voice was close to a roar. He was clearly very angry. None of the officials said anything about this. Just as Ivan said, if peace talks failed, then they could only fight. Everyone had the same idea. Okay, since it's like this, we don't need to have any illusions. Although the Han army is very strong and can destroy a behemoth like the Golden Horde, we are not to be trifled with. Young Master has already dug trenches outside the city, which can effectively stop the Han army's charge. As long as we can hold out until winter arrives, the other side will inevitably withdraw their troops. If we do this repeatedly, with our advantage as the host, we can exhaust their spirit. At that time, we can decide whether to negotiate or fight. The blind duke finally spoke. This was the final decision. No one objected to this. Even those who wanted to surrender could only place their hopes on the army, and hope that they could stop the Han army's attack. Since everyone had the same thoughts, the following matters were much easier to handle. Under the leadership and appointment of the Grand Duke of Blindness, Ivan, Boris, Peter, and Sergei respectively received the mission of guarding the 4 city gates. There were 100,000 soldiers originally prepared to assist the Golden Horde. Together with the 100,000 soldiers in the city, there were a total of 200,000 men under the command of 4 people, each with 50,000 generals. At the same time, the blind duke used his identity as the Duke of the Rossi Duchies to call out to the nearby powers, inviting them to help the king and deal with the Han army together. It was estimated that there were about 100,000 soldiers in this army. In this way, there were 300,000 soldiers defending Moscow. Even when facing the claws of the Golden Horde in the past, the Ross Empire had never treated them so formally. From this, it could be seen that they already regarded the Han army as their strongest enemy. After receiving the mission, the 4 great generals quickly started the work of digging trenches. This time, they were determined to defend the city to the death. They dug trenches everywhere, surrounding the entire city of Moscow and extending for more than 10 miles. It could be imagined that if the Han army appeared here, just filling up the road would be a big project. However, by doing this, they had also blocked their own way out. However, they did not care because they had already transferred all the food they could use into the city. It was not an exaggeration to say that they could hold on for 3 to 5 years. They did not believe that the Han army would be able to surround them for 3 to 5 years. If that was the case, then the cost of transporting grain and fodder would be an astronomical figure. At the same time, the Grand Duke of Blindness also mobilized the 500,000 White Russians in the city, asking them to help dig trenches outside the city. At the same time, he spread rumors, saying that the Han people were more terrifying than ferocious beasts. It seemed that once they broke through the city, everyone would face a dead end. After mobilizing the people, the trenches outside the city were pushed even faster. Some places were even more than 10 meters deep. Not to mention horses, even people could not pass through. Moscow was forcefully turned into an independent kingdom. The people inside could not come out, and the people outside could not go in. Finally, 10 days later, cavalry could be seen roaming outside the city. They were the scouts sent out by the 5-star army. However, they could only roam around for more than 10 miles. Countless large and deep holes blocked their path. On the city walls, the various officials and nobles used the 1,000 miles that they had obtained from the west. When they saw the scene of the Han cavalry roaming outside the city, they could not help but laugh. At this moment, it seemed like they were already the victors. The scene outside the city of Moscow was quickly reported to Yang Chendong, who was rushing here by the scouts. When he heard that the enemy had dug countless trenches outside the city, and that some were even more than 10 meters deep, Yang Chendong was shocked. Are they looking for death? Yang Chendong sighed and could not help but laugh. Originally, Yang Chendong thought that the enemy also had cannons and guns. Although they were not as powerful as the Cold Front, they were still a threat. For this reason, Yang Chendong had arranged for Gray and the others to form a suicide squad. However, he never expected that the enemy would not use firearms and instead use trench tactics. That's right, they could indeed stop the advance of the 5-star army. However, while they could defend the ground, what about the air? How would they defend against their hot air balloons? At that time, countless bags of explosives would fall from the sky. They would not even be able to escape from the city. Wouldn't that be seeking death? Yang Chendong did not know who gave the idea to the Russian Empire. They would not die if they did not seek death. As such, Yang Chendong was not anxious. Since the enemy had already surrounded him, why would he be afraid of them escaping? Yang Chendong's face was filled with confidence. Orders. Take advantage of the fact that the soldiers in Moscow are unable to leave the city to deal with the White Russian soldiers on the outskirts. We will rendezvous with the 1st Sky Cavalry Legion outside Moscow. He was most worried that the enemy would escape before he arrived. If that happened, it would be a long process to find them. Now he could finally rest assured and clean up the trash on the outskirts. This time, he would definitely destroy the Russian Empire. After the order was given, other than a portion of the army that continued to rush out of Moscow, the rest of the cavalry started to attack the nearby cities and tribes of the Russian Empire. Intelligence agents had long since reported that there were at least 100,000 White Russian soldiers in these small cities and tribes. This was a bone that needed to be gnawed on. Rostov City could be said to be the most powerful existence among them. Rostov City had a population of 300,000 and an army of 40,000. It was an existence second only to Moscow among the Russian Empire. The person in charge of this place was a noble from the Russian Empire, General Korbsky. According to the information, this person was skilled in both civil and military matters. He was a difficult opponent. In the past, the Golden Horde had suffered many losses at his hands. This person was proficient in using firearms and had a strong learning ability. He was on par with Moscow, and this gave the Golden Horde a huge headache. That's it. Order Gray to lead the death squad to attack Rostov City. Also call Ba Daojiang over. Yang Chendong already had an idea in his mind as he gave the order. 6 days later, 50,000 soldiers from the 5-star army arrived 8 miles away from Rostov City. They quickly formed an encirclement and surrounded the entire city. They looked like they were ready to attack at any time. Rostov City's 4 gates were already tightly shut. Although they didn't dig countless trenches outside the city like Moscow, the hundreds of cannons erected on the city walls proved their determination to fight to the death. Knowing that this was a tough nut to crack, the 5-star army sent Xiao Chao, the 1st Division commander of the new 2nd Army, Chai Ji, and the death squad's generals Gray, Barry, and Yutu. There was also Ba Daojiang, who was personally sent by Yang Chendong to supervise the army. According to Yang Chendong, Ba Daojiang was here to boost everyone's morale and record everyone's performance. With such a person around, no matter who made a contribution, his name would appear in Yang Chendong's ears and reach the heavens. Everyone was quite happy with Ba Daojiang's arrival. After all, someone needed to spread the news of one's achievements. He was like a historian who could encourage people to do things seriously without worrying about their good deeds not being known by others. Gray was the most excited among them. He even took the initiative to invite Ba Daojiang for a drink to build their relationship. Gray had made a mistake, and was sent to be the general of the death squad. This news had already spread among the surrendered Mongolian soldiers. However, because Yang Chendong didn't leave any traces behind, no one discovered his intentions. On the contrary, everyone thought that the Heavenly Khan was creating an opportunity for General Gray to rise again. After all, if he made a mistake, he had to be punished. Otherwise, how could he convince the masses? As for being the general of the death squad, he wasn't an ordinary soldier. There wasn't any danger. He just had to go through the motions. When he returned, he would naturally be rewarded with merits and could return to his previous status. Even Gray had the same thoughts as well. It was precisely because many people thought this way that no Mongolian general dared to cause trouble, even though Ahuli had temporarily taken over his position. They were all waiting for General Gray's return. Everyone was kept in the dark, but some people who Yang Chendong trusted knew what was going on. Allowing soldiers to plunder was an unforgivable crime in the 5-star army. Even if you had made a great contribution, you shouldn't think of getting any benefits. Being expelled from the army was the lightest punishment. After doing this, Gray could indeed continue to serve in the army with the status of a general. This didn't make sense at all. Chapter 1470. There must be a reason behind this abnormality. Since it didn't make sense, this matter was worth pondering over. Ba Daojiang had his suspicions for a long time, but after meeting Yang Chendong and receiving the secret order, he knew what to do. Ba Daojiang, who was very clear about everything, pretended to be happy on the surface. Whenever Gray invited him, he would show up. After a few times, the entire Mongol army knew that their General Gray had established a relationship with the Heavenly Khan. Everyone knew that General Gray's future was very bright. Gray was also very happy. As he drank with Ba Daojiang more and more, the two of them got along better and better. Finally, after drinking, Ba Daojiang accidentally revealed a piece of news. The Heaven Khan was going to establish a Mongolian army. As long as he performed well, it wasn't impossible for him to become a commander. Ba Daojiang looked as though he had drunk too much. After he finished speaking, he fell asleep, leaving behind an excited Gray who had sobered up. Naturally, he wasn't drunk at all. A commander of a Mongolian army. That was an extremely high position in the entire 5-star army. How could he not sober up when he thought that he could be promoted? No, I must perform well. This attack on the city of Rostov is a good opportunity, an excellent opportunity to show off my abilities. Unknowingly, Gray had set a goal for himself. The military operation to besiege the city took 3 days to complete. After the 4 city gates were sealed, the cannons of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment were pushed forward. They aimed at the Ross cannon, which was also a cannon. However, the Ross cannon was inferior in power and range. The 2nd Cold Front Regiment was prepared to destroy all of the enemy's cannons at the first opportunity. Next, it was time for the cavalry to charge. For this reason, the commander of the new 2nd Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Qiao Qiao, and the general of the death squad, Gray, got into an argument over who should be the one to contribute the most. Commander Qiao Qiao wanted to contribute. He had a feeling that after the Golden Horde was destroyed, there would be fewer and fewer opportunities for them to fight a big war. He had also heard rumors that the 2nd Army was about to expand into the 2nd Army Corps. At that time, Commander Shibi would very likely be promoted to commander of the corps. In that case, there would be at least 3 vacant commander positions. As the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, he naturally had a lot of opportunities and room for promotion. He didn't want to miss such an opportunity. Therefore, he had to use this battle to perform well, and let others see his ability. This would create more favorable conditions for him to compete for the position of commander. Gray didn't know about this, but he wanted more. He had actually set his sights on the position of commander of the Mongolian army. However, what he did not know was that Ba Daojiang had made up the story according to Yang Chendong's wishes. Ba Daojiang had not even formed the 2nd Army, so why would he immediately form the Mongolian army? The reason why Gray had said that was because he wanted Gray to be more active in battle and personally participate in the front lines. It would be best if he could personally go into battle and kill the enemy. Both of them had their own ideas, and neither of them wanted to back down. This was because the commander of the Shai Corps did not come with this army. Instead, he had another mission. As such, everyone began to argue, and no one was willing to back down. In the end, it was Ba Daojiang who stepped forward. He was the vice-captain of the Black Knight's Dragon Guards, and he had an extraordinary status. In the end, he was the one who made the decision to hand over the Vanguard mission to the Suicide Squad. Sixth Young Master has said that since we are a Suicide Squad, it's only natural for us to charge at the very front. Commander Qiao, please take a step back, Ba Daojiang said coldly as he swept his gaze across Qiao Qiao. Ba Daojiang was very clear about the character of his officers. Many times, the more you tried to reason with them, the more unreasonable they would be. On the other hand, if you used a commanding tone, they would listen and fall for it. Indeed, when Ba Daojiang's face sank, Qiao Qiao did not say anything. He didn't want to argue with the vice-captain of the Black Cavalry. That wouldn't benefit him at all. That was because he would never forget that even Commander Shibi had been extremely courteous when he saw the Black Cavalry. Gray laughed heartily. He believed that this was the effect of his relationship with Ba Daojiang during this period of time. He even threw a grateful look at Ba Daojiang. After that, he started to assemble the army and prepare for the charge. In front of Commander Chai Ji, Ba Daojiang gave a very serious order for the artillery support of the cold front to be in place. They couldn't let the Ross Army's artillery and muskets be of any use. When Gray heard all of this, he was extremely touched by her actions. However, there was something even more touching. Just as the army was assembled and ready to charge, Ba Daojiang walked up to the Suicide Squad and personally handed a purple cloak to Gray. General Gray, this is a cloak that only a first-rank general can wear. I hope you can perform well. Once you make a great contribution, you may be able to wear the red cape, the symbol of the army commander, next time. After hearing Ba Daojiang's sincere words, Gray received the cloak with an excited expression. He then put it on in front of Ba Daojiang. The cloak fluttered in the wind, making it even more eye-catching and eye-catching. A burst of laughter came from Gray's mouth. Brothers, the Heavenly Khan has treated us so well. How can we not perform well to repay his kindness? Come charge with me. Take down Rostov City and capture Korbsky alive. Take down Rostov City and capture Korbsky alive. The Mongolian cavaliers below also shouted loudly. After that, Gray intentionally glanced at Qiao Qiao, who was still wearing the white cloak and was only a division commander. Then he laughed heartily and led the 40,000 Suicide Squad to charge forward. The war drums beat, and the sound of the battle shook the heavens. The attack on Rostov City had officially begun. After Gray personally led his army out, Ba Daojiang arrived at the encampment of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment. When he saw the cannons roaring furiously as they bombarded the city gates, he chuckled as he walked over to the 1st Regiment Commander Chai Ji and said, "Regiment Commander Chai, what kind of battle have we not experienced before? There's no need to be so nervous. Come, have a smoke and relax." Chai Ji naturally accepted Ba Daojiang's goodwill. Taking the cigarette with both hands, he thanked Ba Daojiang and chuckled. "I'm not nervous. I'm just excited before the battle." This wasn't arrogance. It was the truth. Ever since the Cold Front's 2nd Division entered Eastern Europe, they had fought countless battles. When had the number of enemies decreased? Especially in the battle between Sarai City and New Sarai City, when they faced hundreds of thousands of enemies, they didn't show the slightest sign of retreating. Now they were only facing Rostov City, which only had 40,000 enemies. There was nothing to be nervous about, but the excitement before the big battle was still a little. "Haha, Regiment Commander Chai is so generous." Ba Daojiang smiled and gave him a thumbs up. After being praised, Chai Ji's face revealed an embarrassed expression. Before he could say anything, Ba Daojiang took a step forward and whispered something into his ear. When Chai Ji, who was originally calm, heard this, he was stunned. It was as if he had been electrocuted, and he didn't say anything for a long time. After holding it in for a long time, he finally asked, "Does the 8th Deputy Commander have a military order?" After asking this, Chai Ji couldn't help but laugh. How could there be a military order for this kind of thing? Wasn't this the same as sending someone into the enemy's hands? But was this Ba Daojiang's idea? Or was it the 6th Young Master's idea? After thinking about it, Chai-ji felt that the latter was more likely. Even if Ba Daojiang had some personal grudge with someone, he would have his own way to solve it. He definitely wouldn't tell this to Chai-ji, who had no friendship with him. Not to mention that he would use the cold front's hands. If he dared to do this, and even dared to tell Chai-ji about it, he probably wasn't afraid of being exposed. If that was the case, this should be the order of the higher-ups. Who was Ba Daojiang's higher-ups? Was there even a need to think about this question? Okay, I know what to do. Chai-ji nodded heavily, as if he had made a difficult decision. Okay, after this matter is done, I'm afraid Commander Chai will be reprimanded. But don't worry, you will be rewarded for what you have done. Ba Daojiang wasn't surprised that Chai-ji agreed, because as long as he thought about it carefully, he would be able to figure out the entire matter. The only thing that was similar was how long it would take for him to figure it out. From the looks of it, Chai-ji was indeed a smart person. Since he was a smart person, this matter would be easy to handle. In the end, Ba Daojiang still left. Or rather, he came over to talk about this matter. Now that the matter was settled, he naturally had to leave. He left Chai-ji behind and said to the correspondent beside him, "Get me 3 cannons. I want to command them personally. Go quickly." On the battlefield, General Gray led the vanguard of the death squad with 5,000 cavalrymen and charged toward the south gate. He saw that Lung Feng's cannons had already started firing and were hitting the city walls of Rostov one after another. The cannons embedded in the city gates were hit and disintegrated one after another. Without the advantage of firearms, the Russian army was like a tiger without its fangs. How could they be a match for the Mongol cavalrymen who grew up on horseback? Gray, who was laughing heartily, was in a very good mood. In his eyes, this battle wasn't difficult at all. With the help of the cannons, he only needed to launch a symbolic attack. When the city gates were blown open, he would be the first to contribute to bringing the army into the city. When the news of this battle reached the ears of the Heavenly Khan, he would be getting closer and closer to the position of commander of the army. Just as he was thinking about his beautiful future, a cannonball suddenly exploded 40 feet away from him. When the intense shockwaves reached him, one of his personal guards was thrown off his horse. This sudden and unforeseen event gave Gray a fright. Gray was shocked by this sudden turn of events. Chapter 1471. What's going on? Surprised, Gray instinctively shouted. However, when he saw that he was less than 200 meters away from the city gates, he couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. It seemed like he had charged too quickly, causing the cannon shells to land nearby. This should be a normal phenomenon. Gray consoled himself in his heart and wanted to retreat a little. He was a little distracted just now, causing him to charge too fiercely as a general. Now the best thing to do was to retreat a little and distance himself from the city gates. This way he would be safe enough. Even if the 5-star army's cannons weren't accurate, they wouldn't fire at his own camp, right? However, if he were to retreat now, what would others think of him? With so many members of the suicide squad around him, would they think that he was afraid? Behind him was Ba Daojiang, who was sent by the Heaven Khan. He must be watching all of this without blinking. If he retreated like this, would they have any opinions? What would the consequences be if they reported this to the Heaven Khan? Because he had a request, there were too many restraints when he did things. At this moment, many thoughts popped up in Gray's mind. He didn't dare to retreat, but instead slowly moved forward. Hurry up and blow up the city gates. Hurry up and blow up the city gates. Gray silently muttered in his heart. For some unknown reason, Gray had a bad premonition. He kept feeling that he was in danger. Speaking of premonitions, many generals and old soldiers who frequently went to the battlefield would have them. The more they went to the battlefield, the more they experienced, the more they saw. Naturally, they would have more experience. As such, they would sometimes have certain premonitions. At this moment, Gray had a bad premonition. At this moment, he only hoped that the city gates would be blown up quickly. That way, as long as the army entered the city, the cannons would only explode within the city, and he would be much safer. Gray silently muttered in his heart. However, for some unknown reason, the cannons of the Cold Front army were clearly not up to par this time. After a dozen or so consecutive shots, they only hit the edge of the city gates. On the contrary, one of the shots landed 30 feet away from him, causing 2 of his bodyguards to suffer light injuries. No, why am I so nervous? It's too dangerous here. Let's back up a little. For the sake of his own life, Gray didn't care about what others would think of his actions. Right now, he only had one thing on his mind, and that was to retreat further and further. An idea formed in his mind. However, before he could complete his actions, 2 cannonballs whizzed over from the left and right, landing right near the purple-cloaked Gray cavalry. One of the cannonballs even landed less than 10 feet away from him. A loud explosion rang out, causing an intense shockwave to blast towards Gray's face. A few of the shrapnel fragments embedded themselves into Gray's body, with one of them striking near his heart. Immediately, blood spurted out from his body, and he couldn't stop it. Very quickly, Gray's purple cloak was dyed red, while his face turned from red to white, appearing incomparably weak. At this moment, he had already dismounted from his horse and was looking up at the sky, wondering what was going on. Why was his luck so bad that he was seriously injured by his own side's cannonball? Even at the moment of his death, he didn't know that someone had done it on purpose. His actions had already caused intense dissatisfaction from Yang Qindong. However, after considering the thoughts of the surrendered Mongolian generals, he didn't publicly punish him. Instead, he chose to let him die on the battlefield. Within the artillery formation of the Cold Front, Commander Chai Ji saw the purple-cloaked cavalry fall through the binoculars, and couldn't help but sigh in relief. He muttered, "The mission is completed. I have to thank Ba Daojiang for giving Gray that flashy purple cloak. If not, it wouldn't have been so easy to find a target on the battlefield." At the rear of the 5-star army, Ba Daojiang also saw this scene through the binoculars. When he saw Gray being sent flying from his horse, he knew that the mission was a success. However, he still put on an extremely sorrowful expression and said to Division Commander Qiao Qiao, "Division Commander Qiao, I'm afraid that General Gray has met with misfortune. You are now the commander. Lead everyone to charge forward and take revenge for General Gray." Take revenge for General Gray. Barlu, Wutu, and the other Mongolian generals who were also in the middle of the army shouted in unison with a tragic expression. "Okay, I'll accept your orders." After Qiao Qiao agreed, he pulled out his cavalry sword and pointed it forward. He shouted, "Everyone listen to my orders. Attack! Attack!" Tens of thousands of the 5-star army and the Mongolian army charged forward. The Cold Front's 2 ND Division's 1st Regiment had also coincidentally broken through the south gate of Rostov City. After the city gate was destroyed by a cannon, there was nothing that could stop the cavalry's charge. Just as Ba Daojiang led his men to attack Rostov City, gunfire was also erupting all over this piece of land. Sergei led his troops to attack the city of Novgorod. His target was the 40,000-strong Rossi army led by General Maxim. Division Commander Xiaofeng led his men to attack Vyaka City. Their target was the 30,000 Russian soldiers led by General Turgenev. The world's 1st Cavalry Legion and the 3rd Cavalry Legion cooperated and headed north to attack Pskov City. Their target was the 30,000 Russian soldiers led by General Vanya. As the flames of war spread everywhere, this piece of land was filled with the flames of war for more than a month. With the support of powerful firepower and the charge of the valiant cavalry, the cities of the Rossi principalities were conquered one after another. Generals and soldiers were killed. Even some of the cities that were not completely under the control of the Rossi principalities were also affected. They were conquered by the 5-star army and changed sides. In comparison, Moscow City was very quiet. Yang Qindong had already brought a portion of his men to the outskirts of the city and set up camp. He didn't look like he was in a hurry to attack. Of course, Yang Qindong was waiting. He was waiting for the main forces of the 5-star army to come back. That would be the time for him to launch the final blow. However, all of this was seen by the soldiers of Moscow. They believed that the 5-star army was at their wits' end. They were helpless in the face of the 5-star army's ubiquitous trenches. Especially since there was a heavy downpour a few days ago. The trenches were filled with water, increasing the difficulty of clearing the trenches. The cavalry would not be able to display their might, and the infantry would need to cross the deep ditches filled with water to advance. All of these would greatly affect the strength of the Han army. As such, the Ross army would be able to easily defend the city. This result made many of the officials and nobles in the city reveal looks of satisfaction. They were even more impressed with Ivan, who came up with this idea. What son of heaven! What extremely intelligent! He said as much as he could without the slightest bit of stinginess. On the other hand, Nevsky stood in the crowd with a thoughtful expression. He had listened to Yang Chendong's words and made sufficient preparations. For example, General Peter, who was originally his clansman, had already discussed in private. If the situation became unavoidable, they would take action to protect themselves. At that time, they might become the only remaining Rossi nobles. However, the development of the situation was not as he had imagined. Because of the trenches, the Han army could not approach the city. It seemed that Yang Chendong's words were just a boast. Who cares? Nevsky shook his head. Thinking that it would not be a bad thing for him if he could defend the city, Nevsky simply threw this matter to the side. Outside Moscow, as time passed, more and more five-star army had completed their mission and were gathering outside the city. After 10 years of separation, Commander Wu Sheng finally met his master, Yang Chendong. Sixth young master. When the two met in front of the army, and because of Wu Sheng's arrival, Yang Chendong personally came out of the camp to meet him, Wu Sheng didn't salute. Instead, he fell to his knees with a plop and began to wail. A 7-foot-tall man actually cried like a child in front of so many soldiers. Not only was this not a joke, but it also caused many people to cry at the same time. If one was not a veteran of the Third Army, they would not be able to understand this feeling. 10 years ago, they had stepped out with great ambitions and lofty aspirations. 10 years later, they had experienced countless difficulties. Now there were less than 200 old soldiers left from the original 10,000. This nearly 95% elimination rate was not something that those who had experienced it could not understand. Yang Chendong's eyes were also slightly red. He took 2 steps forward and stretched out his hand to help Wu Sheng up from the ground. He comforted him. Okay, young master, I know what happened to the Third Army. You have worked hard. Don't worry, this kind of thing will not happen again in the future. For those soldiers who died, we also have to comfort their families. We cannot let the heroes die with regrets. Thank you, sixth young master. Wu Sheng, who had already stood up, quickly saluted again. Then Chunyang, Yi La, Lu Dai, and the others came up and saluted. These people were the first batch to follow Yang Chendong. Many of them were still young, but now they were already middle-aged. Okay, you have worked hard. After Yang Chendong returned the salutes to each officer, he would hold their hands to comfort them and encourage them at the same time. After the officers of the Third Army, it was Tian Hu's world's first cavalry army that came up. Facing them, Yang Chendong did not have so much melancholy. He only nodded to the commander and said, "You have done well." Just these 4 words were enough to prove that the world's first cavalry army's efforts were not in vain. Tian Hu was also very excited. He saluted and said respectfully, "Teacher, good day." Chapter 1472. With the arrival of the First and Third Armies, which were the furthest away from the city, it could be considered a victory. Next, it was time to deal with the main forces of the Rossi army, who were hiding in their turtle shells. On the 3rd day of the 7th month, 1463 AD, the 5-star army launched an attack on the capital of the Rossi Principality, Moscow. When nearly 100 hot air balloons rose into the air, the white clouds in the sky flew toward Moscow, which was more than a dozen kilometers away. Cheers could be heard from the entire 5-star army camp. Before this, countless officers had gone to look at the deep trenches that had been filled with water. All of them had ugly expressions on their faces. In their opinion, it was extremely difficult to launch an attack in such an environment. Exhausting themselves would not bring them any benefits. But what else could they do? The distance of more than a dozen kilometers was like an abyss, blocking everyone's advance. If they could not even walk over, how could they launch an attack? For a moment, many officers were thinking about surrounding the city. It seemed that the only way to solve the problem was to surround the city and not attack. But if that was the case, how many troops would they need to station nearby? Too few people would not do. What if the people in the city rushed out? But if there were too many people, it would be a waste. Gathering the troops together, not to fight, but to keep an eye on the enemy for 3 to 5 years, how much military supplies would that consume? Even if the young Xie was rich, he could not afford such a waste. Most importantly, as long as Moscow still existed, it was inevitable that there would be Russians who held on to hope. The psychological effect of this was the most annoying, and it was very likely that it would cause unrest in the surrounding areas. When that happened, how could there be any talk of development? Just as many officers were wondering what to do, the Air Force was deployed. Everyone's eyes lit up when they thought about how the space could travel through the air and continuously attack the Russian army in the city, without having to worry about the enemy's counterattack. When that happened, the city would probably become a sea of fire. When that happened, it would not be them who would be thinking about how to get in, but the people who would be thinking about how to get out. There was no need to spend any effort or worry. They could just wait for the scene of victory to appear. Excited shouts could be heard from the camp. Sixth young master, since this is the case, we do not need to leave so many troops here. There are still many troops in the surrounding areas who have not surrendered to us. Can we continue to deal with them? The battle-hungry commander Tian who suggested. Yes. Yang Chendong nodded. This was what he wanted to say as well. With a few orders were given. For example, Tian Hu's No. 1 Cavalry Army, the 2 divisions of the new Second Army, as well as the 50,000 soldiers of the Mongolian army, and they charged to various areas to deal with the various factions that had not submitted to Yang Xie's forces. The other 2 divisions of the new Second Army, the 50,000 soldiers of the Mongolian army, and the 20,000 soldiers of the Russian army were left behind to keep an eye on the Russian army and prevent them from escaping. Wu Sheng's Third Army was also to be left behind. They needed to expand their ranks and regain their former glory. For this reason, Yang Chendong allowed the 3rd Legion to recruit soldiers from the Russian division and the surrendered Mongolian army. Everything was based on their needs. After Wu Sheng left with the order, Yang Chendong summoned the commander of the new Second Army and officially gave him the order to establish the Second Army. According to the order, the Second Army would have 4 armies under its command and 1 division under its direct command. It would have 1 more commander than Tiger's Man's First Army. In total, there would be around 150,000 soldiers. Yang Chendong also revealed that the Second Army would most likely stay here in the future to take over the huge territories of the Golden Horde and the Russian Empire. Don't feel pressured. The steam engines you need have already been produced and tested. They will be given priority for your use. When the time comes, all the resources from the Far East will arrive here within 10 days. If something happens, reinforcements will also arrive within 10 days. Moreover, this time will be constantly increasing. Who knows, this prince might arrive at any time by carriage. Ha ha ha. When that time comes, you must not slack off. Hearing Yang Chendong's laughter, Shibi was already crying. Of course, these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of joy and gratitude. He was just a surrendered general. How could he be favored by Yang Chendong and promoted to commander? At that time, he had already attracted a lot of envy and jealousy. Now he was going to be the commander of the Second Army. The commander of the Second Army was Tiger's Man. He was the person who had followed Yang Chendong the longest, and was also the most trustworthy person. Now he had become the commander after that person. Didn't this mean that in Yang Chendong's heart, he also trusted him very much? With this trust, Shibi could not stop crying. In his heart, he had already decided that in this life, he would serve Yang Chendong to the best of his ability. Even if he died, he would have no regrets. Just as Yang Chendong was in the big tent, meeting with one senior military officer after another and assigning tasks to them, the Air Force had already arrived above Moscow in a hot air balloon, adjusting the direction of the wind. The sudden appearance of these white dots in the sky frightened the Russian soldiers and civilians in the city. Although the city was sealed, due to the early preparations, the law and order in the city was not chaotic. Instead, it was as orderly as usual. For them, the only difference was that they could not go out of the city. Over the years, with the continuous efforts of the Grand Duke of Blindness, the Rossi principalities had a good foundation. The so-called war was to get money and food. They had long been prepared to fight to the death with the Golden Horde, so they had made all kinds of preparations and prepared all kinds of resources. In addition, a while ago, Ivan led the army to hunt some of the nearby forces who did not submit to the Rossi principalities, and robbed a lot of good things. This made the city's treasury even more plentiful. As long as it was not too wasteful, it would not be a problem for the 200,000 soldiers and 500,000 civilians in the city to defend for 5 years. This was the source of the Rossi principality's confidence. In their view, as long as they did not go out of the city, it would be difficult for the Han army to attack. If the other party really wanted to complete the work of filling the holes, they were not afraid of such a stupid method. They could use the artillery in the city to attack, and they could also take advantage of the night to counterattack. There was no need for the artillery to hit them. As long as they smashed countless holes, it would be considered a victory. It was because they were well prepared that the civilians and soldiers in the city were not afraid, and still lived their lives as they knew that many Han soldiers had gathered outside the city. This was because they firmly believed that Moscow would be a strong fortress, and no one would be a threat to them for a short period of time. But no one would have thought that this confidence would change because of the white dots in the sky. When 100 hot air balloons appeared in the sky above Moscow, all of the Rossi soldiers and civilians were shocked. There were even many people who knelt on the ground and prayed piously. Obviously, they thought that the appearance of the hot air balloons was some kind of god. This was not the first time such a thing had happened. Almost every time the hot air balloons appeared on an unfamiliar battlefield, there would be such a scene. On the hot air balloon, the Air Force commander, Sun Lixing, was clearly used to all of this. He looked down and saw that there were many civilians in the city, and there was no sign of chaos. He could not help but shake his head. "All right, let us destroy everything." Just like the sixth young master said, this tortoise shell will not only not protect you, it will also become a tomb that will make you unable to escape. Men, throw the black oil. The so-called black oil referred to petroleum. It was found nearby by the mineral prospectors from Chichen City. Naturally, Yang Chendong had done a lot of work, pointing out the approximate location, and finding it was naturally accurate. Since there was black oil nearby, Yang Chendong could even skip the use of explosives and directly spread the black oil over the city. When that time came, once a fire was ignited, it would be impossible to put it out even if they wanted to. Every hot air balloon was filled with wooden barrels filled with black oil. After seeing that Division Commander Sun Lixing had issued the command flag, the wooden barrels began to descend from the sky, smashing straight into the city of Moscow. Hide, hide! Countless wooden barrels fell from the sky and landed in various places. Some of them even smashed into the streets. Some of the civilians who were kneeling on the ground praying did not even have time to dodge, and were smashed directly. They were immediately covered in blood and fell to the ground dead. When some people were smashed to death, the others came to their senses and hurriedly hid everywhere. They wanted to prevent themselves from becoming the next person to be smashed to death. In a short while, more than 800 wooden barrels were thrown away. Looking down from the sky, one could see the scene of black oil flowing everywhere. Sun Lixing ordered the hot air balloon to take off, and began to leave the sky above the city. When the hot air balloon slowly rose into the sky, Sun Lixing lit up a bag of explosives that he had prepared beforehand, and threw it down from the sky. This was the fuse. He could already imagine how fierce the fire would be. It's windy, it's going to rain. Suddenly, Sun Lixing felt that the hot air balloon was shaking unstably. It was especially strong in midair. Immediately give the order to have everyone find a safe place to land quickly. It's going to rain. Sun Lixing sighed that his luck was not good. He could not see the scene of the city burning like a fire, and said with some hatred, as for whether the rain would affect them, this was already one of their training subjects. As for whether the black oil would be extinguished by the rain, it was also tested. The hot air balloon left. The last bag of explosives also fell from the sky. Perhaps because it was thrown a little too early, It did not explode when it landed on the ground. Instead, it stopped for a few breaths of time. Then there was a loud bang, and a huge pit soon appeared where it landed. The things around it also collapsed because of this huge movement. Chapter 1473. It was just a pack of explosives. No matter how powerful it was, the damage it could cause was limited. Its power lay in the fact that the sparks from the instant explosion ignited the black oil that had fallen to the ground. What followed next was a scene of fire everywhere. The raging fire blazed, creating a roasting heat as it burned rapidly. Caught off guard, or perhaps they simply didn't realize how powerful this thing was, many people were still squatting on the ground covered in black oil, observing what this thing was. A great fire ignited, instantly igniting this area, turning it into a sea of fire. Some of the soldiers and civilians who were still watching the show were accidentally stained with the black oil. At this moment, they became fuel for the fire and were instantly engulfed by the flames. They had no time to escape even if they wanted to. Quick, put out the fire! The soldiers and civilians saw the fire that had suddenly ignited, and their shouts rose and fell. Countless basins were filled with clear water, and they poured it over the black oil. However, the result was that not only did the fire not reduce, it even grew bigger. The Rossi soldiers didn't know the characteristics of the black oil, and they didn't know that water couldn't extinguish the black oil. On the contrary, it only made the fire grow bigger and bigger. The flames soared into the sky uncontrollably. Even the 5-star army camp several kilometers away could see it clearly. Many of the soldiers were terrified when they saw the flames that filled the sky. They had originally thought that the measures taken by the Rossi soldiers would give them a headache, and that they would have no choice but to give up on attacking the city. Who would have thought that Bugnam of Gojosian would be able to ignite the fire in the city without much effort? When he thought about how the city gates were tightly shut and how there were deep trenches outside, it was the same as cutting off his escape route. If that was the case, wouldn't it be the same as spinning a cocoon around his own feet? This was really like the saying that one had lifted a rock and dropped it on one's own feet. Not good, it's raining. While the soldiers of the 5-star army were still waiting to watch the show, one of them suddenly felt something and shouted, "That's right, it's really going to rain. Aya, the Rossi soldiers in the city are really lucky." Thinking that the rain should be able to extinguish the fire, many of the soldiers sighed with a look of pity on their faces. In the city of Moscow, although water could not extinguish the fire, countless people were still trying. It seemed that they did not know what else to do. Even though the fire hadn't died down, they were still constantly carrying water. It was only when rain began to fall from the sky that the Russians became excited. One by one, they knelt down on the ground and shouted words of thanks to the gods. Obviously, they thought that the gods saw that they were in danger and decided to help them. However, this expectation quickly turned into disappointment. Even when the rain fell on the black oil, it was still unable to extinguish it. The fire was still burning, as if mocking their ignorance and stupidity. "It's over. It's over." Countless civilians and soldiers sat on the ground, their faces filled with despair. They really couldn't think of any good way to extinguish the fire, so they could only let it burn and wait for the black oil to burn out. Although such a large commotion was only burning in the east of the city, it still attracted the attention of all the civilians. They all looked at it with lingering fear, their faces filled with helplessness and worry for the future. Ivan was also standing in the crowd. If one looked carefully, his expression was also very bad, even somewhat gloomy. He had calculated everything and created countless troubles, so that the 5-star army would not be able to attack the city. This way, they would not be able to do anything to him. What he needed to do during this period of time was to train his soldiers. As long as he had a group of elites in his hands, he could take advantage of the fact that the enemy was lazing around to kill a path of blood, and even defeat the Han army. However, all of these beautiful thoughts were interrupted by the sudden appearance of the fire. Although Moscow was large enough, it would require a lot of kerosene to burn the entire city. It was not something that could be done in a day. However, if there was no way to deal with it, the morale of the soldiers would be slack and the people's hearts would become unstable. If that was the case, how could he train his elite soldiers? Even a sturdy fortress could be opened from the inside. Ivan even thought that those who surrendered would take the opportunity to jump out. If that was the case, then it would be even more terrifying than the fire. It seems that I have to hurry up. Thinking about the things that he had secretly prepared, Ivan could not help but silently mutter to himself. The fire was finally extinguished, but it was not extinguished by someone. It was a natural phenomenon after the kerosene was burned out. After the event, the fire killed around 300 people and injured several thousand people. Among them, it destroyed nearly 1,000 houses and burned all kinds of resources. This was only the first fire. If the Han army were to come every day, it could be imagined that in the long run, Moscow would collapse on its own without a single attack. The fire was extinguished and the rain stopped. The next day was another clear day. In the morning, the hot air balloon once again appeared in the sky above Moscow city. Soon after, barrels of kerosene fell from the sky. This time, the destination was not the ruined east of the city, but the west of the city. That was the place where the rich lived. The barrels still fell from the sky, and after the explosion, the fire was still fierce. Countless rich people were forced to walk out of their homes, their faces full of despair. Knowing that water couldn't be extinguished, all they could do was watch everything happen from afar. This feeling of not being able to do anything made them feel helpless. Nevsky also stood in the crowd, watching the scene of the raging fire. He quickly made a decision in his heart. Although his house was in the city center and not in the west of the city, and these two fires did not cause any losses to him, no one knew where the hot air balloon would burn the fire tomorrow. When he thought of the ancestral property that was obtained through the struggle of several generations, if he could not protect it, then he would be useless. When he thought of the many years of effort that he had put in would also be wasted, he could no longer remain calm. He knew that he had to do something. In his mind, he could not help but think of the last few words that Yang Qindong said to him. He seemed to have found a direction in life. Under the two fires, everyone in Moscow city was in danger. The people who had been burned by the fire were already in despair. Those who had not been burned by the fire were trembling with fear. No one knew what kind of luck they would have the next day. While everyone was panicking, Nevsky came to the house of the Supreme General Peter. As members of the same family, they had a common ancestor. They were connected by blood and supported each other. In order to protect their own interests, they needed to work together from time to time to do some big things. This time, Nevsky came to do something big, and that was to persuade Peter to revolt on the battlefield. Although there was no such word at that time, this was what they had done. As one of the three great generals of the Rus Duchy, Peter was not angry. His years of leading troops made him develop the aura of a superior. When he saw Nevikov's visit, he frowned. Obviously, he had guessed a possibility. Then he sighed and sat there without saying a word. When he entered the hall, Nevsky had been paying attention to Peter's reaction. When he saw Peter sigh heavily, his heart was filled with joy. He did not believe that Peter did not know what he was here for, because he had already leaked some information in advance. After probing many times, Peter had rejected him righteously. But this time, before he could speak, Peter had already sighed and lowered his head. Didn't this mean that Peter's will was shaken? Peter was a general in the army, and he had the authority to command 50,000 cavalrymen. If he could persuade Peter, it would be a great help to the next step of the plan. On the other hand, without Peter's support, even if he could get the help of other nobles, the amount of troops they could gather would be limited. It would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens to turn the tables in the city. Nevsky slowly sat down in front of Peter. He did not immediately get down to business. Instead, he sighed and said, "I have heard about your situation. Your family must have suffered heavy losses. Don't worry, I have already sent 20,000 taels of silver and some food to your family. It should not be a problem for you to survive for a while." Peter's luck wasn't good. His house was located in the center of the Western District. His house was set on fire. Although he had made some preparations and his staff had safely evacuated, it was too late to move the things in the house. Many things were burned. If it was a normal time, it would not be a big deal to lose some things. After all, he was a general in the army and did not lack money. He could just buy some things with money. But now that Moscow had been sealed off, everything was limited. Even if you had money, you couldn't buy it. In this situation, sending some food was like sending charcoal in the snow. It could save lives, so Peter had to accept this favor. Thank you. Peter slowly raised his head and thanked Nevikov. We are all connected by blood. There's no need to be so courteous. Nekov chuckled. But then his face slowly sank. But this is not the solution. What if the next thing is burned? What should we do? This kind of passive defense is not a long-term solution. How could Peter not know that these words were reasonable? But what could he do? Was there really going to be a rebellion? It was very difficult for him to betray the blind Grand Duke. After all, he was where he was today because of the blind Grand Duke. Chapter 1474. Peter did not immediately answer this question, and Nekov was not in a hurry either. Instead, he continued to speak in a calm tone. This time, the Han army came with great ferocity. Even the powerful Golden Horde was destroyed so easily, not to mention our strength is far inferior to theirs. Originally, we thought that with the protection of the trenches outside the city, the Han army would not be able to do anything to us. However, the other side used something that can fly in the sky. It is too powerful, completely ignoring our previous preparations. Moreover, they are in the sky while we are on the ground. We can only passively take a beating. If this goes on, the morale of the army will be in chaos. When that time comes, I'm afraid that even if the general doesn't do anything, others will. Moreover, the Han army only wants the lives of the blind Grand Duke's family. We are only accomplices. As long as we perform meritorious deeds, the chances of us surviving are very high. As the saying goes, every man for himself. And the heavens take the hindmost. Even if the general does not think for himself, you should think for our family. You should also think for the general's family. The general's daughter is only 4 years old and is very cute. If she is buried with some people, wouldn't it be too much of a pity? Enough. Peter finally spoke, interrupting Nekov's words. It was clear that he had already heard these words. Seeing that there was hope, Nekov ignored the other party's obstruction and continued. We are not only doing this for ourselves, but also to save more people in the city. Moreover, from the actions of the Han army, it seems like they don't intend to kill us all. Otherwise, they wouldn't just throw a little bit of black oil at us. They can set a bigger fire, and even swallow the entire city of Moscow. If that's the case, I'm afraid that no one will be able to escape. Is this the result that the general wants to see? Peter's brows furrowed even tighter. He naturally knew that Nekov's words were correct. If he chose to betray the blind Grand Duke's family, not only would he be able to save himself, but the people in the city would also benefit. However, he was after all promoted by the other party. He could not do something like betrayal. Peter still didn't say anything. Nevikov's face turned ugly. He knew that if he didn't use some strong medicine, he wouldn't be able to do it. General, I'm afraid you don't know this yet. Although the Grand Duke of Blindness claims to sacrifice himself for the Rossi people every day, he has already thought of a way out. He has been digging a tunnel out of the city for a long time. Once he succeeds, he will abandon everyone and leave this place. When that happens, we will be the ones to die. This was the first time Peter had heard of this matter. Upon hearing this, he abruptly raised his head. Is there such a thing? Of course, this was done by Ivan and his personal guards. This was also told to me by one of his guards. How could it be false? Nekov patted his chest and said righteously. This wasn't a casual lie he made up. If he really did that, he was afraid that Peter would quickly find out, which would make things worse. He had indeed spent a large sum of money to bribe one of Ivan's guards and got the information from him. When Nekov first received this news, he was also shocked. He cursed Peter's slyness in his heart. However, he immediately thought that this was an opportunity to convince Peter to work for him. That was why he came. As expected, Peter remained silent for a long time after he told him the truth. Seeing that Peter was wavering, Nekov took the opportunity to say, General, those who do great things must not be soft-hearted. You want to be loyal to the other party, But now the other party wants to abandon you. They didn't even tell you about such an important matter. I'm sure they won't inform you when they leave. Is it worth it for us to work for such a master? This time, Peter was at a loss for words. Sigh, even if he doesn't treat you as a human, why should you treat him as a human? General, for your family and the 500,000 civilians in the city, you can't hesitate anymore. Nekhov tried his best to persuade Peter. All right. But I need to investigate this matter first. If it is true, I will contact you. The feeling of being abandoned finally made Peter waver. The only difference was that he still needed to investigate this matter. With his connections in the military, it wouldn't be difficult for him to figure out the truth of the matter now that there was a direction for the matter. Okay. Oh right, the tunnel is near the north gate where Ivan is guarding. Nekhov knew that the matter was almost done. He immediately revealed the location of the tunnel. This time Peter didn't say anything. He nodded heavily. It was obvious that he had thought about what to do next. Not long after Nekhov left, a few of Peter's trusted soldiers followed him out. They were heading towards the north gate. Not long after, a few of them rushed back before the sky turned dark. It was obvious that they had gotten some information. Although it wasn't specific, it was enough to know if it was true or not. Ivan was currently in his courtyard in the city, listening to his men's report. They were talking about Peter's trusted men coming to the north gate to observe the defense. What are they doing here? Ivan frowned and asked. They said that they are here to learn under General Peter's orders. The captain straightened his body and replied. Learn? They didn't learn before. What are they learning now? Ivan had a bad premonition at this moment. General Peter is still trustworthy. The captain said hesitantly. No. The most trustworthy person in this world is himself. Ivan shook his head. He was a person who didn't trust others easily. As long as there was a trace of abnormality, he would ask why. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to sleep peacefully. Could it be that he sensed something? That's impossible. The ones who dug the tunnel are the young master's personal guards. They should be loyal and wouldn't casually leak the news. The captain shook his head and said with a confident tone, Loyal? Ivan gave a wry smile after hearing that. If they were in a strong position, they would naturally not suspect these people who had followed them for many years. However, the current situation was that danger was approaching at any time. At this time, no one could be trusted, and anyone could betray them and become their enemy. Ivan, who didn't trust anyone and couldn't trust anyone, shook his head. This matter isn't right. How about this? Immediately order people to keep an eye on Peter's mansion. I need to know his every move. Also, assign a group of people to wait outside the mansion. Once the matter is exposed, they will take action. In short, we can't leave anything behind, not even the slightest hidden danger. Ivan's words were quite decisive. From the looks of it, a general like Peter could be killed as long as he didn't like it. Seeing this, the captain of the bodyguards gasped and said, Yes, young master, I understand. Okay, go do it. Ivan nodded and arranged. Not long after, a few tall men appeared on the street not far from Peter's residence. They entered a small courtyard to rest. And this scene was quickly reported to General Peter's ears. Ever since he sent people to inquire about the news, he had made sufficient preparations. After all, the crime of spying on a superior was not light. Since he wanted to do this, how could he not be prepared at all? Therefore, long before Ifan took action, he had already sent people to keep an eye on his mansion and the surrounding streets. With his understanding of Ifan, if the other party sensed something, regardless of whether or not he had figured out his intentions, he would first send people to keep an eye on him, just in case. When the people below reported the situation to Peter, his expression was calm, but his heart was incomparably turbulent. Sure enough, he was still suspected. Could it be that it was so difficult to be a loyal subject? With Ivan's temperament, after this matter, the relationship between the two would not be as seamless as before. If there was a chance, the other party would even get rid of him. Speaking of tough means, this Ivan was much more powerful than his father, the Grand Duke of Blindness. Forget it, if that's the case, he is forcing me. At this moment, Peter had made some kind of decision. He slowly got up and went straight to the study. Half an hour later, several servants in the mansion who were in charge of buying and selling tomorrow's food walked out of the courtyard. For these servants, the people sent by Ivan who were in charge of keeping an eye on them did not intend to give up. They arranged for 2 soldiers to quietly follow them. Originally, the captain of Ivan's guards thought that he had already attached great importance to these servants, but he did not know that Peter was in disguise among them. When the group of people walked to a dark corner, his figure flashed and disappeared from the team. Because they did not dare to follow too close, when the people sent by Ivan caught up, they did not notice that such a person was missing in the team. After Peter got his freedom, he was not careless. He circled the streets a few more times. After confirming that no one was following him, he went to his own camp. There were his confidants that he had cultivated for many years. Under his management for many years, these people only listened to him. In the military camp, although it was already dark at this time, it was still very lively with people coming and going. Many patrolling soldiers were walking around with torches. Although there was a dozen miles of trenches as a cover, and there was no need to worry that the Han army would suddenly attack the city, there was no harm in being careful. Even if the other party had something like a flying ball, who knew if there would be other secret weapons? Chapter 1475. When Peter arrived outside the barracks dressed as a servant, several soldiers quickly came forward to interrogate him. When they saw that the person who came was the Supreme General, they were all confused. Peter waved his hand rudely and said to several confidants who had already learned of his arrival, "Keep an eye on these people. As long as they don't act rashly, don't make things difficult for them." The matter of him coming to the barracks must not be spread out. He doesn't trust these patrolling soldiers. Although several confidants were a little puzzled after listening, but since it was the Supreme General's order, they should carry it out without any discount. At that moment, the small group of soldiers unarmed and temporarily watched over them. For Peter, this is nothing more than a trivial matter. At this time, he has stepped into the main tent and secretly met with his confidants here. Although the matter of the black fire released by the flying ball has not yet spread to the barracks, all the soldiers know about it, and they are all at a loss. They don't know what kind of fate is waiting for them. Will they be burned to death by the black fire one day? The arrival of Peter undoubtedly brought hope to everyone. At least let them understand that there is something to do. Peter didn't have the slightest intention to hide from his confidants. He told them about the tunnel he obtained, and then said that because he knows too much, he has been targeted and may even be killed at any time. Those who can come to the tent are all Peter's confidants. It can be said that everyone is bound together for good or ill. If something happens to Peter, it can be imagined that their positions will not be guaranteed. Therefore, everyone can be said to be angry. They accused Ivan of disregarding the righteousness and sneaking away secretly. And at the same time, they also complained about the general's experience. "General, if we can't do it, let's rebel." A 10,000-man general named Sidney took the initiative to stand up. Although his voice was not loud, his attitude was very clear. "Yes, General, let's rebel." The other generals also woke up. At this time, they all thought of something and said in unison, "Good." To be honest, the Han army has contacted this general before. As long as we are willing to surrender, our lives can be saved. As long as we bring out a part of the property, we can also keep a part of it. Peter nodded with satisfaction and threw out a bait to everyone. The so-called property could be brought out of the country. This was a very plausible explanation. Perhaps the little generals in the army did not have much wealth, but in times of chaos, they could rob. Once he got his hands on it, everything would be his. Moreover, Peter had already hinted to them that as long as they could keep a portion of the property they brought out, wouldn't that mean that the good things they snatched this time could be considered their own private property? Even if they turned in some of the good things, the remaining value would be much higher than their own value. The young generals who understood this sentence immediately rubbed their palms together, their faces filled with excitement. Everyone's enthusiasm was aroused, and Peter smiled with satisfaction. If you want the army to listen to you, you have to give them some benefits. Otherwise, why would they work for you? Not to mention that they were dealing with Ivan, the blind archduke who had ruled them for many years. However, it was different with benefits. The Grand Duke of Blindness was nothing more than a synonym for wealth in the eyes of these people. However, robbing was robbing, and there were some things that had to be made clear. At the very least, they could not cause the Han army to be unhappy because of robbing. Everyone, remember, you can't rob the things in the palace. Not only that, we have to keep an eye on him. Those things are left for the Han people. What? The generals were puzzled at first, but when they came back to their senses, they quickly nodded. They could drink soup, but the Han army must eat meat. Otherwise, they would not even be able to drink soup. This was Peter's political wisdom. As the saying goes, it is better to be happy together than to be happy alone. Sometimes, being a little brother is very comfortable. If you don't have the strength to be the big brother, then you will really be a bird that sticks out. Peter's words made everyone come to a realization, and they were still very happy. As the capital of the Rus Principality, Moscow could be said to be the economic, political, and cultural center of the entire force. More than 70% of the country's rich were gathered here. Even if they could not touch the national treasury, there were still many things in the hands of others that could be robbed. With these words, everyone saw a goal, and all the generals rubbed their palms in excitement. It looked like they were just waiting for General Peter's order. This was exactly what Peter wanted. His method of controlling them was very simple, and that was to enjoy the blessings together, so that they could face the difficulties together. This time, he had to deal with the blind Grand Duke, and the one who was said to be a rare genius, Ivan. He had no choice but to do everything carefully. Even so, he did not dare to guarantee that he would win. If the situation had not reached a critical point, he would not have taken such a risk. Of course, there were 200,000 soldiers in the city, and he could not rely on himself. Although he was not sure if he could find helpers, at least he could not let some people ruin his plans. With a rough plan in his heart, Peter began to give orders to the generals, giving them a target to attack. In less than an hour, all the generals were clear about their mission and left the tent. They still needed a certain amount of time to convince the soldiers below to act in concert with them. No matter what the reason was, the next thing was equivalent to a rebellion. Once the people were not united, the possibility of success would be greatly reduced. For this reason, Peter set the time to take action in the middle of the night. That was when the army's defense was the most lax, and there would be enough time for the generals below to arrange everything. Peter himself took advantage of this short period of time to take out the two items on his body, namely his saber and jade pendant. These two items had been with him for many years and never left his side. After taking out these two items, which were enough to win the trust of others, he called over several of the most trustworthy guards in the army and had them take these items to Supreme Generals Boris and Sergei, asking them to meet him in his own residence. After doing these things, Peter once again changed into the mansion's servant clothes and returned to the mansion. On the way, he successfully met up with the mansion's servants who were taking food, and then returned to the mansion without anyone noticing. After this series of actions, the people that Fan sent to follow them didn't notice too much. Perhaps they never thought that the servants who left the mansion could play any tricks, so they didn't take it seriously. They only followed from afar, and didn't even count the number of people. Peter was able to return to the mansion. At this time, there was still about an hour before midnight. At this moment, Ivan was still leading a group of trusted aides who he thought he could trust to continue digging the tunnel. It must be said that the progress of this work wasn't very fast. Because of the cover-up, just the work of taking out the soil and sending it out took a lot of time. But under Ivan's personal supervision and urging, the tunnel was about to be completed. Perhaps it would be completed in 3 days. At that time, Ivan would bring out his ambitious and ruthless character, abandon everything now, and leave this place. While Ivan was constantly urging everyone to speed up, Boris and Sergei each brought 4 guards to Peter's mansion. When Peter heard that the 2 generals came as promised, he couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. He was really worried that the 2 of them wouldn't come. If that was the case, whether his plan would succeed was really unknown. But now it was different. Their arrival meant that his plan was closer to success, and he was more confident. Men, invite them in. No, this general will personally invite them. Peter stood up and strode out to welcome them. The three generals were seated in a triangular formation in an inner hall that wasn't very spacious. Peter personally poured wine for two of his comrades. Then, without saying a word, he downed the wine in one gulp. Then, he took a bite of the delicacies that were already on the table, and sighed in satisfaction. Oh, the wine is good, the dishes are also good. Seeing Peter's actions, neither Boris nor Sergei moved. They just stared at him with a puzzled and somewhat guarded expression. After all, it was a special period, and it was already a taboo for the generals to gather in private. If it weren't for the token, they might not have come even if Peter personally invited them. It was because they saw the token that they thought that something had happened to Peter. That was why they decided to come and take a look. Since Peter was fine, they had to be more careful. If they accidentally fell into a trap, they would be too stupid. The two generals didn't drink, and Peter couldn't help but laugh. What? Am I not worthy of your trust? While speaking, Peter intentionally looked at the empty wine glasses of the two generals, as if he had just finished the wine in front of them, and proved that there was no problem with the wine. So what were they worried about? Sigh, speaking of which, this time I took the risk to invite the two of you here because I have something to tell you. To be honest, this will be the last time I will sit down and drink with the two of you. Just treat it as an extra thought. How about we have a drink together? Peter said as he reached for the wine jug, as if he was going to pour more wine. He could see that even though they seemed to have a good relationship, no one actually trusted each other. Since that was the case, he didn't feel any psychological pressure to use the two of them. Wait, let me do it. Sergei interrupted Peter's actions and reached for the wine jug with a smile on his face. He first shook it lightly, then casually furrowed his brows. Is this all you have? How can it be enough for the three of us? Chapter 1476. After saying that, Sergei opened the wine jug without Peter's consent and looked inside. After seeing that it was just an extremely ordinary wine jug, he closed the lid again. Sigh, no matter how important the wine is, I'll pour it for you. Of the three of them, the oldest was Boris, and the youngest was Sergei. What he said made sense, but why did he check the wine jug just now? He still didn't believe it, so he took the opportunity to check it. After seeing that there was no problem, Sergei was relieved. He cast a reassuring look at Boris, who had been sitting there without moving. Then he began to fill the 3 wine glasses on the table. Peter saw Sergei's actions with his eyes and heart, but he didn't say anything. However, he didn't say anything, as if everything was supposed to be like this. He chuckled and raised his wine glass again. He looked at the two of them and said, "Come, for our last reunion, let's drink." Clang. The 3 wine glasses collided together, and everyone drank it in one gulp. After drinking the wine, Boris and Sergei's eyes fell on Peter again. Obviously, they wanted an explanation at this time. Peter was already prepared for this. He first let out a long sigh, then slowly said, "To tell you the truth, I can't even protect myself now. Someone is targeting me." Oh. Boris and Sergei let out a sound of surprise, but their expressions didn't change much. Obviously, they had thought of a possibility before coming. Otherwise, why would Peter send his personal keepsake to them? But even so, the two weren't nervous. First, they didn't do anything wrong, and second, they didn't believe that the Grand Duke of Blindness or Ivan would casually touch them. Especially when Peter was about to be dealt with. The people in the army must be unstable, so their position should be safer. It's just that although they believed that they would be fine, they were still very curious about what caused Peter to do this. In a sense, the 3 of them were all in the same situation. They were all generals trusted by the Grand Duke of Blindness, and given military power. Peter saw the performance of the two, and he sneered in his heart. Sure enough, their performance did not exceed his expectations. Sure enough, it was like this. Don't look at how they usually had a good relationship. As if they would advance and retreat together no matter what happened. However, when one of them really got into trouble, the so-called unity of heart would become problematic. The other two would also not sacrifice their entire family's lives and their own political future for one of them. This was also good. When Peter did what he wanted to do next, he wouldn't have to worry so much. If he still had some guilt in his heart just now, then he had completely let it go and let it go. Even though he had already made up his mind and had already done so, Peter still sighed and slowly told them about Ivan secretly digging a tunnel out of the city. Sigh. I wasn't cautious enough, and was discovered by young Master Ifan when I was sent out to investigate. Presumably, there should be people sent by young Master Ifan keeping an eye on my residence right now. It might even implicate the two generals. It's fine, it's fine. We are all brothers. How can we be afraid of being implicated? Boris, who was the leader, shook his head, looking like he was not afraid of being implicated. But in his heart, he was cursing Peter. This person told him such a secret, so he couldn't retreat from this whirlpool even if he wanted to. But on the other hand, compared to getting himself into trouble, knowing about young Master Ifan's plan was more important. The other party actually wanted to escape, which was somewhat out of Boris's expectations. But on the other hand, the situation in the city was so grim. If it were him, he would also prepare a way out. It was fine if he didn't know about this before, but now that he knew, he had to have a share in this matter. He also wanted to leave with Ivan and the others, and not stay in the city and wait for death. Sergei also had the same idea. Compared to Boris, he was more sincere. His gaze towards Peter was more or less filled with gratitude, thanking the other party for informing him of such important news. This way, he could make some preparations in advance. Come, brother Peter, this younger brother toasts you, thank you. This time, Sergei took the initiative to raise his glass and said very sincerely, "Oh, this older brother also toasts you, cheers." Boris also raised his glass hypocritically. "Okay, let's drink together. Perhaps this is it in this life, but let's be brothers in the next life." Peter also said with slight emotion. A trace of sorrow appeared on his face. This sorrowful expression fell into the eyes of Boris and Sergei. They thought that Peter was revealing his true feelings, and couldn't help but feel a little touched. After all, they had been comrades for so many years, and more or less, they had some feelings for each other. Peter was indeed revealing his true feelings. He thought that after today, these two so-called brothers opposite him would become prisoners, and they would probably never be friends and brothers again. Thinking of the various things of the past, he sighed in his heart. The three of them sat together and drank with their own thoughts. It was also at this time that the news of the two generals rushing to Peter's residence was reported to Ivan's ears. After learning of this, a gloomy expression flashed across Ivan's face. If it was said that he only suspected that Peter knew about the tunnel before, he was now certain. What is he trying to do? Does he think that Boris and Sergei will help him if he tells them about it? How naive! Ivan snorted coldly in his heart. In the past, he had always heard from his father-in-law that Peter was a talented person, and how powerful he was, but now it seemed that it was nothing more than that. "Young master, should we arrest them now?" The guard captain asked in a reminding manner. "Send someone to keep an eye on their every move. I want to see what choice they have." Ivan shook his head and dismissed the idea of making a move now. In his opinion, since Peter had summoned the other two over, it meant that they were still hesitating. At the very least, they had no intention of attacking. Since that was the case, there was no harm in waiting for a while. He was really curious about what Boris and Sergei would choose and what kind of decision they would make. This would also determine whether he would take them with him when he went out of the city next. Ivan wanted to use this matter to judge people's hearts, but what he didn't know was that Peter deliberately created such a smokescreen because he understood him. In this way, he would have enough time to make a move. The guard captain received the order, and sent more people to keep an eye on every move in Peter's residence. According to the young master's order, once they sent someone to summon their subordinates, they should immediately take them down. The reason why they made this decision was that they thought that their every move was very secretive, and they didn't know that Peter had already discovered them. Time passed by little. The military camp belonging to Peter was being mobilized, and according to the instructions of General Sidney, who temporarily took over the position of General Peter, the military camp was under martial law and no one was allowed to leave. At the same time, Nevsky also lobbied several dignitaries who held a certain amount of military power in their hands. The first fire needed to be lit by them. Although the blind Grand Duke trusted Boris and the other two generals, according to the management mechanism of the army, he still arranged people outside each military camp to keep an eye on everything. This was the principle of using people with suspicion, and using people with suspicion. For example, once Sydney made a move, the news would reach the ears of the blind Grand Duke as soon as his army left the camp. In this way, the other party could make some targeted measures in a very short time. So no matter how one looked at it, the military camp shouldn't make the first move, so this task fell into the hands of Nevsky and the other dignitaries. There was still a quarter of an hour before midnight, and the generals in Peter's military camp had already arranged everything. Most of the soldiers in the army had already made up their minds, and there were also some who were extremely loyal to the blind Grand Duke, but they had been put under house arrest. The generals who had arranged everything were standing at the inner gate of the military camp, waiting for the attack signal. It was only a quarter of an hour, and the waiting would soon pass. Finally, under everyone's expectations, a huge fire suddenly ignited in the direction of the palace in Moscow. The monstrous fire could be seen very clearly from afar. Haha, they succeeded. Come, inform the whole army to attack. Sydney was riding on a strong horse. After seeing the fire, his eyes lit up with excitement. Then he shouted, and the army that had been waiting for a long time rushed out of the military camp in batches. The fire in the palace attracted the attention of many people in the middle of the night, and it also disrupted the order in the palace. Many palace guards were busy putting out the fire through various methods. The blind Grand Duke was also woken up by the servants. At this time he was in his bedroom with a gloomy expression. When the external enemy suppressed too much, internal strife was easy to breed. This was a historical rule. In this regard, the blind Grand Duke was already prepared. He sent out countless spies, trying to keep an eye on the places where the people lived in groups in the city. In case something happened, he would suppress it immediately. It was just that the Grand Duke of Blindness never thought that the first fire would burn in his palace. From the looks of it, it was definitely not the work of ordinary people. They did not have such great power. The one who did it must be an important minister, a general, or a noble. You can't hold it in anymore? Thinking that it was actually those people with high status who couldn't help but make the first move, the blind Grand Duke was disappointed. But at the same time he secretly swore that no matter who did it this time, he would make the other party pay the heaviest price. He wanted to use this matter to remind the other dignitaries that if they dared to have other thoughts, their end would be very miserable. At this time, what they should do was to help each other in the same boat and overcome the difficulties together. Chapter 1477. Men, quickly summon the three great generals for a meeting. The Grand Duke of Blindness said calmly. The palace guards went to pass on the message. And just as they received the order and left, young Master Ifan also came to the palace and saw the Grand Duke of Blindness sitting there with an ugly expression on his face. Father-in-law, are you okay? I'm fine. An amiable smile appeared on the blind duke's face. No matter how angry he was, as long as Ivan appeared in front of him, it would seem that all his anger would dissipate. It could be said that he didn't just like his son, he doted on him. Fortunately, Ifan was also capable and didn't let him down, so he wasn't spoiled. But even so, he dared to do some big things in private. For example, he didn't tell his father-in-law about the tunnel. And now such a thing happened in the city. The fire actually spread to the palace. Ifan certainly knew that some people in power couldn't help but take action. This was the beginning of the real chaos. He also thought that it was necessary to explain the matter to his father-in-law. Father-in-law, your son has been hiding something from you. What is it? The Grand Duke of Blindness said nonchalantly. Because he spoiled Ivan, there were many things that he would not report to him before doing. The Grand Duke of Blindness was already used to this. Father-in-law, I dug a tunnel, a passage leading to the dense forest in the north of the city. Once the tunnel is dug through, we can quickly reach there from the city. As long as the attack is sudden enough, We will definitely be able to catch the Han army off guard and carve out a bloody path. Ifan opened his mouth and confessed everything. The dense forest in the north of the city, a passage. At this moment, the blind Grand Duke finally couldn't stay calm. His face revealed a nervous expression. He had to admit that this was indeed a good way to escape. But the question was, why did Ifan tell him now? Could it be that the passage has been opened? With doubts, before the blind Grand Duke could speak, Ifan continued. It's just that I don't know why this matter was leaked. It was actually known by Great General Peter. He even sent people to investigate tonight, but they were sent away by my men. What? The Grand Duke of Blindness suddenly stood up. At this moment, his nearly blind eyes seemed to burst with infinite anger. Peter knows. Where is he now? Right now, he's having a drink with General Boris and General Sergei at home. My men have been keeping an eye on them. At this moment, Ivan said with a guilty conscience. No matter what, his actions this time were a little overboard. Although her father-in-law might not pursue his own responsibility, it was still necessary for him to apologize. The three of them are together? What's Peter going to do? The blind Duke quickly calmed down. He had a feeling that things were getting out of hand. He even suspected that the fire in the palace had something to do with it. The blind Duke seemed to be thinking about something and didn't speak for a long time. Seeing this, Ivan said anxiously, Father-in-law, is it because I shouldn't have dug the tunnel? No. There's nothing wrong with leaving an extra path. Digging the tunnel was originally one of the escape routes. This isn't wrong. However, such a secretive matter shouldn't be known to outsiders. Furthermore, since you suspect that Peter knows about this matter, why didn't you immediately control him? The Grand Duke of Blindness shook his head and questioned him. He could allow Ivan to make some small moves and even act on his own without informing him, but he couldn't allow him to mess things up. This was especially so at such a crucial time. Facing the black flames released by the Han army's celestial sphere, the nobles and commoners of the city were already in a state of panic. Especially at such a time, everything had to be done with caution. Otherwise, the slightest carelessness could lead to a huge problem that could spiral out of control. It's fine that you escaped through the tunnel, but it was also discovered by others. More importantly, you knew all this and didn't take any remedial measures. That's your fault. Capture Peter, including everyone in his residence, the Grand Duke of Blindness said in an unquestionable tone. Ivan couldn't help but frown when he heard this. Father-in-law Boris and Sergei are also in General Peter's residence. He indirectly meant to remind the blind Duke that the two generals might know the truth now. Should they also be arrested? The blind Duke's expression showed a trace of pain at this moment, but he quickly nodded and said, Arrest them all. After I talk to them, I'll consider whether to release them or not. Capturing 3 generals all at once, and all of them wielding great power at that. Even the Grand Duke of Blindness had to think carefully. Understood. Ivan nodded. At this time, he had to admit that he was far inferior to his father in terms of ruthlessness. It was said that kings and emperors couldn't have their own feelings. Everything had to make way for benefits. It seemed that this was indeed the case. After Ivan received the mission, he was about to bring his men to Peter's mansion. But before he could bid farewell to the Grand Duke of Blindness, he saw a guard captain rushing into the main hall with a panicked expression. Reporting to the Grand Duke, there's a mutiny in General Peter's barracks. They rushed out of the barracks and ignored our warnings. They are running in the city, and their destination seems to be our palace. This is bad. Ivan's expression changed drastically. The worst situation still happened. The blind Duke's face also became much gloomier at this moment. But he quickly returned to normal. Don't be afraid. We'll deal with whatever comes our way. Peter alone can't overturn the sky. How about this, Ivan? Immediately mobilize your soldiers to guard the palace. At the same time, find the soldiers who are familiar with Peter's generals, and ask them to help persuade them. I believe these people will know what to do. The Grand Duke of Blindness was indeed not panicked, because he knew very well that although Peter was also a general with great power, all of his power had been given by him, and the soldiers under him had also been given by him. Since he could give it now, he could take it back when he needed it one day. Ivan was infected by his father-in-law's calmness. It seemed that even if the sky fell, he wouldn't be afraid. He quickly nodded and went to gather the army. The blind duke sat high in the hall. He had to wait for this rebellion to subside. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to rest. In Peter's mansion, Boris and Sergei also heard the commotion outside. At that moment, the two of them had unsightly expressions. Could it be that Peter's military camp had already made a move? If that was the case, the meaning of them staying here would be completely different. If they stayed here, would it make people think that they were already accomplices? If that was the case, based on their understanding of the Grand Duke of Blindness, it would be impossible for them to stay out of this matter. On the other hand, Peter was drinking contentedly, not caring that Boris and Sergei wanted to eat him. Of course, the reason why he could be so calm was all because of the 8 murderous guards in the room. With these guards in hand, Peter wasn't afraid that some people would use force on him. Even if he couldn't use force, he wasn't afraid at all with just his mouth. At this moment, the more Peter didn't seem to care, the angrier Boris became. He felt that he was being used. As for Sergei, he couldn't hide his emotions and directly asked, "Peter, what do you want? Are you trying to drag us into a rebellion with you?" Such a shout finally shocked Peter. He also put down his wine glass, slowly raised his head, and looked at Sergei. How can this be called a rebellion? This is looking for a way out. Or do you think that under the attack of the Han army, the Blind Duke's regime can still be maintained and developed? You. At this moment, Sergei was actually a little speechless by Peter's question. That's right, in the face of the black water that was simply impossible to guard against, and even impossible to guard against, they were completely powerless to resist, and could only passively wait for the black water to burn. If they were lucky, they might be able to live for a few more days, but once the place where the provisions were stored was burned, then chaos in the city was inevitable. If that was the case, in the situation where everyone wanted to live, who would care about who the Blind Duke was? As for what he said, no one would listen to him. Sergei shut his mouth, and his face turned red. Boris finally spoke up. "Peter, even if that's the case, we should think of other methods, such as breaking out of the encirclement. After all, we have an army of 200,000 soldiers and plenty of firearms and cannons. If we bring them out, we might be able to carve out a path of blood." Aha! This time Peter didn't speak out against it. Instead, he nodded in agreement. That's right. However, he did not know if General Boris had thought about the possibility of breaking out of the encirclement. Even if we break out, we still need someone to charge and cover the rear. If that's the case, how many of us can survive? I don't want to gamble on my luck. If I'm arranged to charge or cover the rear, I'm afraid it'll be too late to do anything. Boris, who originally wanted to say something, didn't say anything. With the Blind Duke's trust in him, he was confident that he wouldn't do those dangerous things. However, nothing was absolute. If he was really given such a dangerous mission, would he still be able to say no? If he really did that, the Grand Duke of Blindness would be the first person to not forgive him. Chapter 1478. Thinking that this possibility was not impossible, Boris's face became a little ugly. Even he couldn't guarantee that he would be safe, let alone Peter and Sergei, whose status in the heart of the Grand Duke of Blindness was far inferior to him. It was no wonder that they would have such thoughts and actions. But no matter what, Boris still didn't want to do something like rebellion. After all, the Grand Duke of Blindness had treated him well over the years. He couldn't do something like betraying his benefactor. But how was he going to say it? As long as he said this, wouldn't it prove that he wasn't on the same side as them? If this was the case, then he didn't have to do anything next. Peter would let his guards kill him. Don't doubt if Peter dared to do this. He even dared to rebel. What else wouldn't he dare to do? The two of them suddenly stopped talking. Peter's face had a little more smile. He knew that he had only convinced the two of them initially, but it was still far from being able to do big things with them. So he changed his tone and said, "Brothers, now that things have come to this, I have no choice but to do this. And you are now in my mansion, so it is absolutely impossible to stay out of this. You should think about what kind of decision to make. Time is of the essence, and there is not much time for us to hesitate and consider. Since the flag of rebellion had already been raised, they couldn't stop. Otherwise, they would be handing their lives over to others. Peter would never do such a foolish thing. So there were only two paths in front of the two. One was to follow him, and the other was to oppose him and be killed now. Well, 15 minutes. Please make a decision voluntarily. No matter what the decision is, I will accept it. As if he had just said a very ordinary sentence, Peter sat back down after saying this. He picked up the wine glass again and drank slowly. What do you mean by, I will accept any decision? I'm afraid that once they object, it will immediately lead to a fatal disaster. This wasn't voluntary at all, it was completely forced. However, the situation was not as good as the others. At this moment, the two of them didn't dare to say anything. They could only look at each other and return to their seats. The hall once again fell into silence. There was only the heavy breathing of the 8 blade-wielding bodyguards. A huge fire suddenly broke out in Moscow, and soon, the sky seemed to be burning red. Yang Chendong, who was outside the city, couldn't help but notice all of this. Yang Chendong was already asleep when he received the report from the Black Cavalry. By the time he put on his clothes, the fiery red area was getting bigger and bigger. Looking at all this, Beta Persei scratched his head. Young master, don't tell me they're really fighting amongst themselves. Yang Chendong rolled his eyes at Beta Persei. What do you mean by really fighting amongst themselves? Looking at the situation, it's clearly fighting amongst themselves. Yang Chendong had already expected this result, but he didn't think it would come so quickly. After all, it was only 2 days of fire. For a huge city like Moscow, it wasn't a good thing at all. Who would have thought that the other party couldn't hold it in anymore? All of this should be the doing of that guy named Nevsky. It seems that the words he said to him that day really worked. If that's the case, then so be it. Anyway, they are all different races, and there is no lack of Rossi nationalists among them. If such people die, then they die. It has nothing to do with me. I just hope that more people can stay in the city. After all, if I want to build this place, I can't do without sufficient manpower. Let's go back and sleep. Yang Chendong turned around after thinking it through. He didn't put the fire in the city in his eyes at all. This matter won't end so quickly. Instead of paying attention to them, it would be more practical to inquire about how many tribes the world's best cavalry army has conquered, and how many captives they have captured. In Yang Chendong's eyes, even if there was an internal conflict in Moscow, it wouldn't be resolved in a short time. Now was not the time to make a move. At this moment, in the city, 15 minutes had passed. Peter was looking at Boris and Sergei, waiting for them to make the final decision. Time's up, generals. Please make the final decision, Peter said unhurriedly. Peter spoke unhurriedly, but the 8 guards beside him were already sharpening their swords, as if they would immediately turn on each other if they made the wrong choice. The 2 generals didn't look too good at Peter's pressing. In such a situation, no matter what decision they made, they would feel threatened. However, this was the truth, and they couldn't resist. The more careless Peter was, the more they could feel the murderous intent behind him. Forget it, since we are going to die anyway, we might as well fight it out. But I don't know if the Han army will accept our surrender. Finally, General Sergei couldn't remain calm and made a choice. Hearing this answer, Peter was very happy. Brother Xie, don't worry, the Han army has already contacted us. They said that as long as we can bring the heads of the blind Duke and Ivan to them, not only will our safety be guaranteed, we will also be able to keep a part of our property. You actually contacted the Han army in advance? This can't be fake, right? At this moment, even Boris was a little moved. He couldn't believe that Peter was so well prepared. However, he didn't seem to have any opportunity to contact the Han army. Don't tell me he's lying. Peter naturally heard the suspicion in Boris's voice. He knew that if he didn't explain things clearly, he wouldn't be able to convince the 2 of them. After thinking for a while, he told them about how Nevikov went to the Han army camp as a peace negotiator and discussed the terms of surrender with the other side. So it's like that. Hearing that it was done by Nikev, Boris really believed it. According to his understanding, Nikev was definitely capable of doing such a thing. He was living under someone else's roof, and he was so well prepared. Considering that the blind duke had prepared an escape route without informing him, the choice he should make was very clear. He didn't seem to have any other choice. Okay, if that's the case, I will listen to General Peter. Boris finally nodded. At this moment, Peter couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He was really afraid of making a move against the #1 general of the Ross Duchy. The other party's influence in the army was too great. If he couldn't be friends, then he could only be killed. He definitely couldn't be an enemy. Fortunately, he didn't disappoint and convince the other party. Overjoyed, Peter nodded to the personal guard beside him. Very quickly, someone brought over a pen and paper. In front of the two generals, Peter drafted an agreement in triplicate, with the signatures and fingerprints of the 3 generals on it. In the Ross Duchy, the effect of a contract was still very strong. If someone violated it, then they would lose their credibility and would no longer be trusted by others. With this, Peter finally felt relieved. Then, the 3 generals could finally sit down calmly and discuss how to rebel. This result was somewhat out of Peter's expectations. Originally, the 3 of them wouldn't have any cooperation, and he was even prepared to take action. He didn't expect that they would actually choose to rebel with him. This was something he didn't even dare to think about before. He didn't know that everyone had a desire to live. Moreover, this time, Ivan didn't inform them about the tunnel. This was enough to prove that when Ivan really wanted to leave, he might not necessarily bring them along. Since Ivan had already abandoned them, why should they stick their hot face to some cold ass? In any case, the 3 generals sat down together and quickly came up with a plan. Time waits for no one. The situation outside was getting more and more chaotic. Who knew what would happen as time passed? Moreover, the blind duke ruled the Rossi duchies. How could he be so easy to deal with? How could they not defeat him quickly? Accidents could happen at any time. In less than half an hour, the 2 generals left Peter's mansion. On the street, they saw the corpses on the ground. Judging from the clothes of those people, they should be the soldiers under Ivan. These people were obviously killed by Peter's soldiers. The civil war had already begun. Under Peter's arrangements, the troops sent by Ivan to capture the 3 generals were all intercepted outside the mansion. This also indicated that the conflict would escalate. If they didn't fight to the death, it would be impossible to stop the war, and there would be no result. At this time, outside the palace, the sounds of killing were also incessant. West Delhi led a group of soldiers to launch fierce attacks again and again. It was just that the palace had long been on guard against outsiders, and the defense of the palace was so tight that it wasn't easy to take it down. In this terrain that was easy to defend and difficult to attack, Ivan's army had also been mobilized. Together with the palace guards, they put a lot of pressure on West Delhi, and the latter's casualties began to increase. "General, this won't do. The city walls are high and the arrows are sharp. Thousands of our brothers have already died." Seeing wave after wave of soldiers charging forward and then falling down in groups, and seeing their comrades who were talking to them a moment ago turn into corpses, many of the young generals had anxious looks on their faces. There were even some who began to waver in their hearts. They were already considering whether what they were doing was right or wrong. Right now they were only facing Ivan's army and the palace guards. Once Boris and Sergei's armies joined in and began to surround them, the final result would most likely be defeat and death. As a rebel, one didn't even need to think to know what the consequences would be. "We can't retreat. We have to believe in the general." West Delhi shook his head firmly as the commander of the front line. However, the look of anticipation in his eyes from time to time betrayed his heart. He believed in General Peter, but how long had it been? Why didn't the general show up? Chapter 1479. The attack on the palace was blocked, and the losses were not small. Ivan, who was in charge of guarding the palace, relaxed a lot. "Men, go and tell them that we are only the leaders. As long as they are willing to lay down their weapons, they can be spared." "Young master, they are rebels." Hearing that Ivan wanted to spare the rebellious soldiers, the young general beside him was puzzled. Just carry out the order. Ivan shook his head. He did not care about the young generals. This was just a matter of convenience. What he wanted now was only victory. Once he dealt with Peter, the city would be quiet again. He would continue to dig the tunnel and leave. At that time, he would leave these people in the city and wait for the Han army to deal with them. What did it have to do with him whether they lived or died? Ivan had given a death order, and his subordinates had no choice but to carry it out. Such shouts quickly spread out from the palace. As soon as the shouts of execute the leader and disregard the accomplices rang out, the already low morale of the young generals and soldiers who already had their own ideas slowed down even more, making it clear that they were only doing their job without putting in any effort. Perhaps at this time, as long as someone stood up, these soldiers would turn around and kill Sidra instead of attacking the palace. The situation was critical. Seeing that another rebellion was about to happen, and even a few young generals were looking at Sidra with unfriendly gazes, a large group of White Russian soldiers rushed over from outside the palace. Before they arrived, their voices were heard. Someone has confused the blind duke and killed their way into the palace to clean up the emperor's subordinates. The people who came were the subordinates of Boris and Sergei. Although they did not directly say that they were rebelling, the words "clean up the emperor's subordinates" were enough to prove their position. At some point, Peter had already arrived at the front line and came to Sidra's side. His expression was very calm. "Don't panic. They are here to support us. Continue to attack." Peter's appearance was undoubtedly a stabilizing force, causing the commotion in the army to stop. Everyone did not have any other thoughts. They cooperated with the other two armies and attacked the palace again. This time, it was not just two armies that came. At the same time, there were also some cannons that were hurriedly transported over. Facing the high walls of the palace, their plan was to use the cannons to create an opening, and then win with superior numbers. The appearance of the cannons boosted the morale of the soldiers. They wouldn't have to risk their lives anymore. As long as the walls of the palace were breached, they would have many more opportunities. At that time, it would be the time for them to utilize the advantages of infantry and close combat. With the reinforcements, the morale of the rebel army soared. On the other hand, the situation of the White Russian army in the palace became dangerous. When the blind Grand Duke learned that Boris and Sergei had betrayed him, he finally lost his temper. He smashed an expensive porcelain on the table in front of him and threw it to the ground. Ivan, who was standing below, was also full of regret. At the end of the day, this matter was still caused by him. If he hadn't secretly dug the tunnel and was caught, this wouldn't have happened. "Father-in-law, I want to leave the palace and have a chat with the two generals," Ivan said as if he had made a decision. He only mentioned the two generals. Obviously, he had pushed Peter away, which proved that he did not intend to forgive this person. No. How could the blind Grand Duke not know what Ivan meant? But did he really think that Boris and Sergei were so easy to talk to? At this point, taking the initiative to talk to them was tantamount to sending a sheep into a tiger's mouth. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to come back easily. The blind Grand Duke was old. He would rather take the risk himself than let his son do this. "Ivan, the future of the Russian Empire will be in your hands. No matter what, nothing can happen to you. You carry our hope for the future. How about this? Immediately arrange for people to break out. As long as you break out of the palace, find a place to hide in the city. Remember, you must not be found. Then I can die in peace." Father-in-law. At this moment, the tears in Ivan's eyes finally flowed down uncontrollably. "Okay, go and prepare. Take advantage of the darkness to break out." The blind Grand Duke waved his hand with a trace of pity on his face. After leaving this time, he really didn't know when they would meet again. "Father-in-law." After Ivan shouted again, he knelt down in front of the blind Grand Duke. This kneeling was also out of reluctance, but more of gratitude. Go. Remember, don't be so willful in the future," the blind Grand Duke said with a forced smile. When Ivan heard this, he couldn't stop crying. Unknowingly, he seemed to have grown a lot and matured a lot. That night, just as the artillery was transported to the outside of the palace, The gate of the palace suddenly opened and thousands of soldiers rushed out. Their appearance caught the unprepared Peter's three-way coalition army off guard. Soon, they broke out of the encirclement and rushed out. Peter was quite angry about this matter. If the blind Grand Duke and young Master Ivan were among the people who rushed out, wouldn't they be unable to complete the Han army's order? Fortunately, not long after, the blind Grand Duke's figure appeared on the gate tower of the palace. As soon as the blind Grand Duke appeared, the soldiers on both sides stopped what they were doing without prior agreement. This old man had ruled the Rossi principalities for decades and led them from weak to strong. Whether it was in the army or among the people, he still had a high prestige. Normally, as soon as he appeared and casually said a word, everyone would kneel down and worship him. But now, his appearance only caused everyone to stop fighting. A hero past his prime. This saying was the most appropriate thing to say about the blind Grand Duke. Standing on the wall of the palace, the blind Grand Duke shouted in a loud voice, "We are all Rossi people. Let's not fight anymore. Let's do things that hurt our loved ones and please our enemies. Don't you want this king's life? Come, I won't resist. You can do whatever you want, but you can't hurt the guards of the palace. After all, they were once your brothers. As long as you swear to do this, I will allow you to tie me up as you wish." Grand Duke. For a moment, because of these words, countless guards knelt down. They were all moved by the blind Grand Duke's loyalty. At this time, they wanted to use all their strength to fight to the death with the rebel army outside. It had to be said that the blind Grand Duke's method of bewitching people was superb. At this time, his words had completely restored the army's morale that had fallen. However, his mind was not on the civil war at all. He was indeed prepared to be tied up. This was also because he saw that resisting would not change the situation. Since that was the case, it was better to just surrender. At the same time, it could be considered as leaving a difficult problem for the Han army. As for what kind of problem it was, perhaps others could not see it, but Bugnam of Gojoseon of the Han army could definitely see it. Otherwise, he would not have been able to defeat the Golden Horde, nor would he have been able to destroy the Rossi Principality. Grand Duke, are you really willing to be tied up? Hidden in the army, Nevsky was more excited than anyone at this time. He knew that if this was the result, the chaos in the city would soon end and the victory would be decided. But if he did not surrender, with the support that the blind Grand Duke had gathered over the years, who knew how long it would take to win and what kind of price he would have to pay? Seeing that it was Nevsky's voice, how could the blind Grand Duke not guess that this person was one of the instigators? However, he did not have any hatred at this time. Such a small character would not be in his eyes. He still had a very calm expression as he replied, "That's right. As long as the three generals can swear not to touch the thousands of guards in my palace, this Grand Duke will let you do whatever you want. What can you do?" In the palace, the 5,000 soldiers that Ivan had brought were basically all dead. As for the remaining 45,000 soldiers, they were blocked outside the palace by the three generals. Now there were only 5,000 palace guards left in the palace. It was because of the limited power around him that the blind Grand Duke made this decision after weighing the pros and cons. It was naturally a good thing to be able to subdue the enemy without fighting. If they didn't fight, they couldn't guarantee that they would win. After all, anything could happen as time passed. After Peter and the other two generals looked at each other, they nodded and made a solemn oath in front of the entire army. The general idea was that as long as the blind Grand Duke surrendered, and the guards did not resist, they could spare the lives of these people. Of course, the oath made in front of so many people was valid. If anyone violated it, they would be hated by both humans and gods. The blind Grand Duke was very satisfied with this result. He immediately walked out of the palace and came to Peter and the other two generals. Seeing the Grand Duke of Blindness striding over and looking at them with his extremely low vision, Boris and Sergei lowered their heads at the same time. Even Peter, who was very mighty just now, turned his head to the side, not daring to look directly at the Grand Duke. In the end, Nevsky took the initiative to stand up and ordered the guards around him to subdue the blind Grand Duke. With the fall of the palace, the overall situation was set. After finishing the important matter, Nevsky sent people out of the city overnight. At dawn, they reported the news to the Han army camp outside the city and to Yang Chendong, who had just woken up. "There's a result so soon?" Yang Chendong asked in surprise. In his eyes, whether it was the blind Grand Duke or the future Ivan the Great, they were all famous figures in the history of the Ross Kingdom. How could such people be so easy to deal with? Even if someone said that this civil war would last for 10 days, half a month, or even longer, he would believe it. Chapter 1480. Yes, the messenger sent by Nevsky said that the blind Grand Duke took the initiative to be captured, and the palace was also captured. Now the entire city of Moscow is waiting for our army to take over. Only young Master Ifan managed to escape, but he will still be in the city. They will definitely be able to find him. Young Heir added from the side. The blind Grand Duke took the initiative to be captured? No wonder. But did Ivan escape? This must be the work of the blind Grand Duke. Yang Chendong smiled after listening. That's right. If someone said that a general in the Nevsky army could take down the blind Grand Duke and his son, then he wouldn't believe it. Young Master, what should we do next? Beta Persei had long been accustomed to Yang Chendong talking to himself, and he had long dispelled his curiosity. What he wanted to ask now was what to do next. What else can we do? As long as Ivan is still in the city, we are not afraid of not being able to find him. Pass down my orders. The siege cannot be stopped. No one is to be allowed to leave without permission. Also reply to the messenger. Tell him to inform Nevsky that he has done a good job. This king will also fulfill his promise. Now all he needs to do is to send people to fill up the big holes outside Moscow to ensure that our cavalry can enter the city smoothly. Since you were the ones who dug the hole, you should be the ones to fill it up. Yang Chendong wouldn't let his soldiers spend so much effort. He also used this time to think about what to do next. To be honest, whether it was dealing with the Golden Horde or the Ross Principalities, things went smoothly beyond his imagination. Yang Chendong was confident about the final victory, but to be able to solve the problem so quickly, this was the important role of the three basic factors. First, the 5-star army has the most powerful weapons in the world. Whether it is the power of the flintlock, the fierceness of the artillery, or the hot air balloons, they are far beyond the products of this era, and therefore can achieve the role of destroying the enemy on the battlefield. Secondly, there were many veterans in the 5-star army. They had been on the battlefield and were not afraid of death. The benefits of military merit were generous. Under such good conditions, they could even display their own strength. This ensured that the soldiers in the army were always very high-spirited, achieving the goal of being invincible and invincible. Let's put it this way, if a group of 500 elite veterans fought against a group of 5,000 new recruits, then the victor would definitely be the veterans with fewer people. It was only because they didn't have stage fright. They knew how to protect themselves while effectively attacking their opponents on the battlefield. As long as the general's orders and direction were correct, they would be able to play to their advantage. On the other hand, if it was a group of new recruits on the battlefield, it was very likely that they would fall into disarray. When they saw blood and death, they would not be able to adapt and would forget everything. Even if the opponent's butcher's knife was in front of them, they would not know how to block it. Looking at the 5-star army, along the way, they had fought countless battles. There was no need to doubt the combat power of such an army. It was easy to predict which side the scales of victory would lean towards. The third point was the corruption and disunity of the Golden Horde and the Rossi Principalities. Everyone had their own thoughts and could not be united. If they won the battle, then it would be fine as long as they followed the prescribed order. However, once they encountered a setback, the drawbacks of these problems would be revealed. In the end, there would be internal strife, which would give the opponent an opportunity to take advantage of. Looking at these two major battles, didn't the Rossi Principalities only get destroyed because of internal strife? Thinking of this, Yang Chendong also began to reflect. Would this problem fall on the 5-star army? The answer was very likely. Now that Yang Chendong had great power and prestige, some things would naturally not happen with his existence. However, no one could guarantee what would happen after he was gone. Men die, birds die in the sky. Yang Chendong's thoughts only drifted for a moment before he retracted them. It was very tiring to live alone, so there was no need to think so far ahead. Anyway, after the world was unified, even if something really happened, it would be the meat in the pot. It would just be the Han people replacing the Han people, so it was not a pity. Yang Chendong's order was passed back to Moscow. After a discussion with the three generals, Nevsky began to arrange for people to go out of the city to fill in the holes. At the same time, the biggest civil strife since the establishment of Moscow took place. In the name of looking for Ivan, the army began to loot the city. This was originally a promise made by the generals to make the soldiers work for them. Now that it was done, it was time to fulfill the promise. The city of Moscow was plunged into its darkest hour. Countless nobles attached to the blind Grand Duke became the targets of looting. If they dared to resist, the soldiers who rushed into the courtyard dared to kill them. For 10 days, the city was filled with smoke and fire, and corpses were everywhere. According to the statistics, at least 70% of the nobles in the city were impoverished in just 10 days. 10 days later, the holes outside the city were filled, and the cavalry of the 5-star army began to enter the city. As the vanguard, the new Second Army was the first to enter the city and disarmed all the White Russian soldiers. But just as they said, when the cavalry entered the city, they didn't do anything excessive to the surrendered soldiers and civilians. As long as they cooperated with them, their safety was guaranteed. Of course, there were those who obeyed, and those who did not. For example, there were some soldiers loyal to the blind Grand Duke hidden among the civilians who jumped out to kill the cavalry of the new Second Army. But since they were already prepared, their appearance was nothing more than suicide. Before entering the city, Yang Chendong had already given orders. Although Moscow had fallen, there were still many opposing forces in the city. So unless everyone in the city was evacuated, the danger would not be eliminated. Killing intent could appear at any time, and fighting could happen again at any time. With Yang Chendong's orders, how could the cavalry of the new Second Army not be careful? In addition, with the armor on their bodies, ordinary swords, spears, and arrows could not hurt them unless they were at close range. This caused the opposing forces in the city to suffer heavy casualties in the end. Originally, Pyotr and the other generals were dissatisfied with the disarming of the Han army as soon as they entered the city, but after seeing the waves of assassinations on the streets, they immediately shut their mouths. Anyone who raised any objections at this time might be mistaken as an accomplice of the assassins. That would be a big problem. In the following 3 days, the cavalry of the new Second Army killed no less than 3,000 people in the city. Only then did the public security situation become much more stable. But even so, Pyotr was clear that there were still many people in the city who opposed the Han army. It was just that the timing was not right, and they did not reveal themselves. However, the 3 days were up, and it was time for Yang Chendong to lead the army into the city. After all, if the time dragged on for too long, it would give people the impression that the Han Bugnam of Gojoseon was afraid of death. If that was the case, it would only help the enemy's morale and flames. Compared to the Golden Horde, the Rossi Dukedom's emotions were much higher. Under the indoctrination of the Grand Duke of Blindness, many White Russians had established themselves with the slogan that the world was vast, and White Russians were the most respected. In their eyes, they were the strongest people in the world. They should rule the world and not be ruled by others. Under the extreme nationalism, the public security in the city was worrying. However, since Yang Chendong had said that he would enter the city in 3 days, there was no reason for him not to enter the city when the time came. Outside the east gate of Moscow, 3 days later in the morning, Yang Chendong rode a white dragon and entered the city under the protection of 2,000 black-clothed and black-armored black cavalry dragon guards. Yang Chendong, who already had the strength of a grandmaster, admitted that unless it was a cannon, it would be extremely unrealistic for others to want to keep him here. Even so, as long as he was prepared, he could move into the warehouse at any time. This was truly a self-preservation weapon. With this kind of capital, even if it was a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, he would still dare to charge in. Not to mention, Moscow was currently filled with the new Second Army's 5-star Army cavalry. What was there to fear? At the city gate, Nevsky, Pyotr, Boris, and Sergei were already waiting in a welcoming formation. When Yang Chendong appeared here, they were still some distance away. However, these people all knelt on the ground. Some of them didn't even dare to raise their heads, let alone move, to show their sincerity. Now they were at the mercy of Yang Chendong. Even if Yang Chendong changed his mind and wanted to kill them all, these people would have no power to resist. Since that was the case, there was no other way other than to willingly submit to him. Get up. Riding a white dragon, Yang Chendong appeared in front of a group of Russian officials and spoke in Russian. It was important to clarify that the current white dragon was no longer the white dragon of the past, but the descendant of the white dragon. After all, there was a limit to the lifespan of a healthy horse. Although the old white dragon was not dead yet, it was not as fast as it used to be. Fortunately, after conquering so many places and conquering so many territories, the white dragon had already found a suitable mate for the next generation of white dragons, which was already ready for service. But without exception, the owner of the white dragon could only be Yang Chendong. No one else had the authority to ride on them. The high and mighty Yang Chendong greeted the group of Russian officials in Russian. Only then did these people who were kneeling on the ground stand up in trepidation. "Come, give me a horse, and we will tour the city together," Yang Chendong said to Beta Persei and the others in Mandarin with a smile on his face. Being able to ride a horse with Bugnam of Gojoseon was a very glorious thing. At least, that was what the generals of the 5-star army thought. And now, this treatment was given to these surrendered officials, which made many people envious. Chapter 1481. Naturally, Yang Chendong's actions were to appease the people and tell them that he would not kill the surrendered generals. Secondly, it was to make these people the target of public criticism and make it impossible for them to betray him. After all, in the eyes of some opponents, the closer these nobles and ministers were to the Han people, the more unforgivable their crimes were. Perhaps some people in the crowd understood this, and their faces became ugly. However, for those who were determined to surrender like Nevsky, they did not think so much. Hearing the treatment given by Yang Chendong, they all got on the horse happily, their faces full of excitement. With someone taking the lead, even if the others were unwilling, they could only choose to get on their horses. After all, compared to angering those staunch nationalists, Bugnam of Gojoseon in front of them was not to be trifled with. He could kill them at any time. Everyone got on their horses, and Yang Chendong began patrolling the city with these people. Xia Bei, who had already been instructed, had already planned the route. On the wide road in the city, there were fully armed new Second Army cavalry soldiers on both sides of the road. They were responsible for the security of the periphery. The 2,000 black cavalry soldiers were protecting Yang Chendong and were responsible for the safety of close quarters. Under such a formation, unless it was an attack from cannons, even a group of soldiers with guns could not threaten Yang Chendong's safety. Even so, along the way, they still encountered a total of 13 attempts to assassinate them, big and small. Some of them were killed by the new Second Army cavalry as soon as they appeared. Some of them relied on their numbers to break through the periphery, but the black cavalry soldiers drew their swords and mercilessly attacked, killing the white Russian soldiers on the streets. By the time they finished patrolling and arrived in front of the palace, many of the black cavalry soldiers' armors were covered in blood. Regarding this, the black cavalry soldiers acted as if they did not hear anything. Perhaps they were used to such scenes and were not moved at all. They were still standing upright on their horses. When Nevsky and the other nobles saw this scene, their bodies trembled, and they looked at Yang Chendong with reverence. In the eyes of Pyotr and the other generals, who were used to seeing blood, they were also amazed by the strength of the black cavalry. They had observed very carefully just now. When the black cavalry soldiers killed people, they did not even blink, and their arms did not tremble at all. It felt like they had done this countless times, and were already numb to it. Facing such an army, even without flying balls or black oil, the generals could not help but ask themselves if they could stop them. The result would be the same. During the patrolling the city, More than 1,000 White Russians were killed. Only then did Yang Chendong was satisfied and entered the palace to listen to the reports below. The white, the black and black cavalry soldiers of course, and the White Russian soldiers, the black cavalry, and the black cavalry soldiers. However, all the good things in the palace added up to 40 million silver taels. Of course, this did not mean that the White Russians were poor. In fact, a lot of the wealth was in the hands of the nobles. She had done a rough investigation. If the nobles could only leave with 10% of their wealth, they would have to hand over more than 200 million taels of wealth. From this, it could be seen that they were still very rich. After 2 big battles, Yang Chendong was very satisfied with the harvest he had gained. Especially in the battle against Moscow, he had only sent out 2 flying balls and dropped some black oil. His side had not suffered any losses, and yet he had gained so much. It seemed like it was really worth it. In his joy, Yang Chendong looked at Shibi and said, "Apart from taking out a portion of the spoils for the army to continue expanding, the rest will be split equally between you and Crimson City to develop this place." Hearing that he could keep half of the spoils, Shibi was naturally overjoyed. Yang Chendong had told him about the establishment of the new Second Army. Now that he had so much wealth to support him, if he did not do well, he might as well go home and be a farmer. Shibi was very happy. Yang Chendong also made a request. He wanted this place to undergo a small change every year, and a big change every 3 years. He wanted to make use of the vast land here to become Yangtze's granary. Not only that, but there were also many forests and rich minerals. This place would also become Yangtze's heavy industrial zone. In the future, some of the heavy industrial factories in Crimson City would move here. As the owner of this place, Shibi had to be ready to welcome and cooperate. In order to let Shibi do his work better, Yang Chendong not only gave him the position of commander of the new Second Army, he also gave him the position of governor of the Eastern European province. Yes, the land where the Rossi principalities and the Golden Horde were located was merged into a new province called the Eastern European province. In comparison, the area it occupied was far larger than any of the provinces under Yangtze's control. Giving such an important position to Shibi showed how much importance he attached to this place. Shibi knelt down on the spot to express her gratitude. At the same time, she promised that she would do her best to live up to Yang Chendong's kindness of recognizing her and promoting her. Yang Chendong did not doubt Shibi's loyalty. If Shibi had other thoughts, she would have surrendered when she was surrounded by the Baiming army. Shibi only trusted Shibi. If Shibi gave her too much power, there would be accidents. Yang Chendong proposed that officials from Crimson City and other provinces would be sent to cooperate with Shibi. Not only that, but the position of governor of the Eastern European province would also have to be given to Shibi. A person could be a political and military leader during special times, but it would not last long. In this regard, Shibi naturally agreed. If Shibi was allowed to continue working, why would he worry? It was not a good thing for a person to have too much power. Shibi did not want to live in fear every day. After Shibi's other matters were settled, Yang Chendong held a meeting with Nikovsky and the others. Yang Chendong took out all the regions except Crimson City for everyone to choose. According to Yang Chendong, these people could not stay in the Eastern European province. Otherwise, he would not be at ease. These people would also live very carefully. It would be better for them to move out and choose a new place to live. They would face an unfamiliar environment there. They would not be able to find their people there. They would not even be able to find people who could speak Russian. They could only communicate in Chinese. In the end, after a few years, they would gradually assimilate into the third-class Han people. Everyone was relieved that Yang Chendong had given them a way out. Not to mention, Yang Chendong had allowed them to take away 1/10 of their current wealth. With money, they wouldn't have a bad life anywhere. At that moment, everyone began to choose a new place to live in. Fortunately, Yangtze's territory was large enough for everyone to choose. They would not have a chance to meet again. During this time, Pyotr, Sergei, and several other important generals also expressed their desire to continue serving in the army. They were different from Boris. Boris was indebted to the Grand Duke of Blindness. Now that he had betrayed his old master, how could he still serve the Han people? But Pyotr and Sergei were different. They were still in their prime and wanted to make a name for themselves. Especially after seeing the strength of the Han army, they wanted to join and make a name for themselves. For this kind of request, Yang Chendong did not hesitate to refuse. The reason why he used the generals of the Golden Horde was that they had been leading cavalry for many years and were truly valiant generals. Secondly, they were uncultured and thought that whoever fed them was the master. Of course, they would be easy to control. But the generals of the Russian Empire were different. They were influenced by the Grand Duke of Blindness and knew right from wrong. People with ideas like these were dangerous existences who could be stabbed in the back at any time. Not to mention, these generals were used to commanding firearms. In Yangtze, the main force of firearms was the Cold Front. How could such an elite be led by someone from a different race? After Yang Chendong rejected them without hesitation, Pyotr, Sergei, and the others could only suppress this idea. Fortunately, they had looted a lot of good things in the city over the past 10 days. Even if they only kept 1/10 of what they had, the rest was still a shocking amount of wealth. They could live well wherever they went. After making arrangements for the higher-ups of the Russian Empire, the Grand Duke of Blindness, who was detained in the prison, was brought out and sent to the main hall that he used to lead. The difference was that he was no longer the master of the main hall. Instead, he was a prisoner. Considering that the Grand Duke of Blindness had poor eyesight, Yang Chendong deliberately arranged for him to sit 2 steps in front of him. The old man and the young man looked at each other, sizing each other up. In his previous life, Yang Chendong had dealt with a lot of Russians. Most of them were fond of wine, greedy, and terrifyingly arrogant. Although the country's economy was not doing well, the weapons they produced were even feared by developed countries. In the common words of the common people, they were a fighting nation. Yang Chendong made the first move, taking advantage of the fact that the other party had yet to gain momentum to destroy them. He effectively suppressed the other party's development, and also trampled on the other party's arrogant mentality, making it worthless. Now that he was the victor, Yang Chendong did not stop him from observing the Grand Duke of Blindness, who was a very important figure in Russian history. The Grand Duke of Blindness was also sizing up Yang Chendong. Although his eyesight was very limited, he was relying on his conscience. After a few observations, he could not help but sigh. This Han man, who was more than 20 years younger than him, gave him a feeling of invincibility. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.